Okay, so the cameras are on. Thanks everybody for coming to our October meeting. As everyone knows, we're going to be having the full groups meeting more frequently, and you should have gotten the schedule for that. I don't have it memorized. It's basically every other week. The idea being that then the subcommittees, the committees could meet in the off weeks, and this would give us a chance to combine and get together and connect. I have a mild concussion, so I'm about 10 seconds behind where I would like to be, so I probably will leave after a little while. I'm okay, I'm functional, I'm here. Jaws dropping, but I just want to let you know if I'm searching for a word, that's why, but everything's fine. I was playing with
But did you score the touchdown?
Yeah, yes. So a couple of things I want to say before we get started is we have some members of the cabinet here, we have Don McKay here, and we're going to kind of front load the cabinet stuff in a moment so they can go home and spend time with their families and do all that stuff. But we're very thankful that they are here tonight. I do want to just follow up on one thing from our last meeting, which was the expansion of the steering committee. You'll remember the last time we all got together, we asked each committee to suggest someone from the committee to join the steering committee, and I'm happy to announce that that's all been done and completed. And so from finance, we have Ann Rosenblum. From facilities, we have Brent Ross. From education, we have Alex Brunk. And from communications, we have Jen Freeman. I think three of them weren't able to be here tonight, which tells you already. No, I'm just kidding. So now that they're on, I'm off. I resign. We've had a good time. They're going to meet with us on Thursday morning at our normal meeting, and then, as you know, the board workshop is Thursday night, and that workshop is for the steering. At the table will be the steering committee, committee chairs, but all of you are welcome to be in the audience and are certainly invited. So, oh, here's Alex. In fact, okay. So that's the beginning formality announcement parts, and now what we're going to do is turn it over to. I'm going to turn it over to someone else. Take it through.
So, Nicholas, do you have the slides? Okay. Raj is sent them to you. You should be able to pull them up. But we don't need them right away. So the agenda, there should be a paper copy of the agenda floating around. Does everyone have it? There must be some extra slides.
There's some of that.
The same one that was emailed, right? So?
The same one, yeah.
We have paper copies of that. Yeah.
So the first thing we wanted to do is address some issues that have been raised about the concepts in general. So we're not talking about individual concepts today, or configuration concepts. We're talking about issues that might apply across the board to all of them. And so many of these issues have come up, and we wanted to discuss them and get feedback from the cabinet to explore these issues further. So some of them came from education, some of them came from facilities, and other people as well. So the first question that we wanted to talk about is whether fifth graders should be in, and actually someone should be taking notes. Is there someone who could volunteer to take notes for tonight? Minutes, I mean? Someone who hasn't taken minutes before want to volunteer?
I can do it.
Great, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so first question we want to talk about is fifth graders in middle school and discuss the pros and cons of having fifth graders in middle school. So I think probably we should start out with education to talk about this, if they have a viewpoint on it, and get the point of view of the cabinet. Is there someone from education who wants to talk?
I think educationally there are positives and possible negatives. Some positives would be the opportunity to open the fifth graders up to different clubs and electives and after-school activities and enrichment activities. In terms of the negatives, we're not sure. We have to do some more research if that's the best place emotionally and socially for fifth grade students. We do have some initial concerns about them being with the 7th and 8th grade students and if that's the best fit for them.
Okay. Did you guys talk at all about world languages and stuff like that? About being able to offer more course offerings?
Unfortunately, I don't know if course offerings is our job as much as it is the superintendent's cabinet's job. I don't.
So I think we all kind of feel like administration, the positives that could happen from having fifth grade at the middle school is to be easier to offer some of those expanded programming options like
Yes.
languages and stuff like that. The possible negatives are, there is some educational research that suggests that moving kids up to junior high a year earlier can have some negative social consequences. So it's not, I don't think it's overwhelming, but it's a concern certainly. So that doing so would present, again, some possible benefits, but it's not only positive.
And I would just add that in terms of the fifth grade, what we've talked about is planning for opportunities for them wherever they end up. So regardless of whether or not they end up with the 6th, 7th, and 8th, or if it turns out that we're not able to do that, it's not feasible here, or we decide we don't want to do that, and the fifth graders stay, with a younger cohort, that we want to allow space and opportunities, whether that's world language or additional STEM or robotics or enrichment, that we want the fifth graders to have the space to do some more things in whatever the result is that we have.
So if we went that route, it would obviously be more expensive doing it in all the elementary schools rather than at the two middle schools.
Well, if we were doing,
depends.
it depends on the configuration. If we're doing K-5s, then yes. If we're doing K2, 3, 5s, then we would only have three sites.
buildings.
And we could have a lot of flexibility in terms of scheduling and collaboration between staff. So there's opportunities that exist there. I think it's challenging to give an answer to this without independent of a configuration, right? Because we don't know where physically what the environment would look like, what the relationship between, and there was a lot of talk about this in the community, where would fifth grade be relative to 8th grade, not just physically in a facility, but culturally, So it's a challenging conversation to have sort of in a vacuum on its own. But I think that wherever we land in terms of, configuration to pursue, we definitely have a mind towards greater opportunities for fifth grade.
And I think that also we need to ask the cabinet where they see, clubs and enrichment activities going, because I'd hate for us to say something like, oh, we're gonna offer Mandarin, or, and then it not be necessarily true, because they get to drive what curriculum they want to put in place. It's not choices that we necessarily get to make. That's kind of where I was going with. I don't really know how to answer that. I didn't want to. We are looking for opportunities for the fifth graders, but I think that's what they're hired to do.
So it sounds like even if you take either the fifth grade in the middle school or the fifth grade in the elementary school to its best realization, it's not an open and shut case that you would recommend one over the other. It really is context sensitive. I'm trying to recap, not add something.
Absolutely, especially given the fact that and I don't know that we should assume, but if we're assuming 2 middle school sites, we don't know what those would look like right now.
We can't hear you.
Sorry, I said that it's really hard if we're assuming 2 middle school sites. We don't know what those would look like for 6, 8 right now to support the current curricular needs, the current, green space needs. We're already coming at this from a deficit for 6, 8. And so trying to envision what it would look like for 5, 8 on the sites that we have is tricky.
So the recommendations are really more about how to adapt either one of those things to a particular set of configuration options, rather than say, we as the education committee would really put one in front of the other overall.
There's too many moving parts
So
for us to do that ever.
At the risk of simplifying, it sounds like the trade-off is, call it the educational benefits versus the potential social emotional costs. And so if there's educational benefits, those seem like there's a relatively clear financial drivers that would come into play about sections and class offerings, et cetera. But for the social emotional, if there's not really a easy way to say that we're offering these support systems or creating some additional support structures to help us transition, is there some way that type of thing could be accomplished at this individual school level? In other words, could there be enhanced transition team or whatever to help ease the shift from 4th to 5th grade, if you're talking about putting 5th graders with the 8th graders?
I don't think it's the shift that's the issue in the social emotional thing. From what we've been reading in the literature, it's the exposure to the older kids. That's the social emotional aspect.
But I mean, is there a way to have some kind of, I don't know, club or whatever that helps to potentially mitigate some of that concern?
I mean, I think that's kind of what they were trying to do with the original plan that failed, was they were trying to have kind of a 5-6
School,
building,
right.
and a 7-8 building to kind of isolate them and keep them within pods. I think it was 100 kids per pod, 150 kids per pod. That was one of the ways they were trying to do that in the best way that they could. So that's possible.
Okay, but it also seems that with the grade center, with K2 and the 3-5 configurations, you can sort of bridge those two by offering, you get the economies to be able to offer some of these things that you wouldn't have by having separate K-5 schools, but then you still are able to keep the 5th graders separately, so you get the educational benefits without some of these potential social negatives.
Way to put it.
Sounds good. I guess the question is, why stop at 5th grade, right? I mean, like, why are we isolating 5th grade? What about 4th grade? What about 3rd grade? I mean, you can't, aren't there some students in the, doesn't every student benefit from being exposed to years above them? And, you know, they do. That's why ultimately the best model is a K-8 model. But unfortunately, we just don't have the infrastructure to ever offer that. So, you know, that's why when you're saying is 5th grade better in middle school than it is in elementary school,
I'm just saying, if the 5th grade with the 8th grade is sort of a sticking point because of the potential social emotional costs, then is there a way to kind of maybe mitigate some of that?
So I'd like to invite the cabinet to chime in here. If you guys have a point, I'm sure you have a point of view on this, and we're interested in where you guys are coming from.
I mean, anybody can jump in. You know, we were looking at you know, efficiency as well as opportunities, and so when we were looking at the middle school campus, it gave us both. But if you were to ask us, you know, if one weighs more than the other, we were very excited about the opportunity piece. Our 5th graders are really ready for more. And as Joy brought up, I mean, there's ways to do it so that it's not, you know, 5th grade walking down an 8th grade hallway, so to speak. So, you know, there are different configuration models that would keep, you know, 5 and 6 together or 7 and 8 together. It was a goal of ours was to start to provide our 5th graders, because at one time our 5th graders did have world language choices. But looking at some of the other opportunities like band and orchestra, you know, that critical mass of kids would be something that we would be interested in. And there's just different configuration ways to do that.
I'd also add that it's not an uncommon model to have 5th graders in a middle school. So a lot of our area school districts have 5th through 8th grade in them pretty commonly. And if you draw upon the research of Turning Points 2000 around adolescent learning and literature that's in there that defines adolescence as 11 through 15. Also, the National Middle School Association identifies adolescents from 11 to 15. And our own state identifies 5th through 8th grade as considered a middle school endorsement. So pretty big kind of major research places or, you know, banks of information identify 11 to 15-year-olds as that adolescent period. So it can be done well both ways. It's common both ways.
So I have a question. If you had an Edgewood and you had 5th through 8th in Edgewood, just the way it is now, and you didn't have, you know, more than 800 students, would that be acceptable, or is the fact that 5th graders and 8th graders aren't segregated in that building a deal breaker? I mean, I think. No, it's not. Okay, so you think that would be a positive if you could do it and there were space. That would be a positive over what we have right now in terms of what we're offering 5th graders. Okay.
But I thought your question was, if you can't separate them, then would you not? Right?
Well, I'm saying, would you not do it? What I'm hearing them say is no. It would be okay. It would still, on balance, the benefit to the 5th graders would offset the fact that they're not segregated from the other kids.
So we're hearing from the cabinet a preference for 5th grade with older students. Is that fair to say?
It looks like Monica was about to chime in.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think, you know, a lot of the concern has been that social emotional between
fifth graders and that's seventh and eighth graders, and I mean, they are very different. And even Illinois with their middle grades endorsement, it's 5 through 8, but then also it's kind of funny, if you look at their elementary, right now it's K through 9 currently, it's actually changing so that it's actually 1 through 6, so there's that overlap. So there's nothing to say that we can't put them together. I mean, even Illinois recognizes that they could be put in the middle school. I think it's really thinking about what the community feels comfortable with and really thinking about those structures in which, you know, we can have kind of like, as we put before, those fifth and sixth graders are very similar academically and social emotionally, and those seventh and eighth graders are as well. So you could put them, let's say in an Edgewood, in the same building, and kind of think about maybe the flow of the day being where we have those 2 grade level spans. But then after school, when it comes to the extracurriculars and the clubs, and again, the beauty of it is you have that critical mass where students will flock together based on their interests, and that's okay when they're mixed in grade levels. And that was one of the things that we heard in Wilmette, where they said, you know, we have different sites for our 5th and 6th graders and 7th and 8th graders, but after school, they walk over to the other buildings for wrestling or for, you know, fine arts, and that's really where you get essentially the biggest bang for your buck.
Building on what Dan said earlier, one of the other concepts that we looked at as a committee is the idea of doing regional grade centers, which would have, you know, 3 schools that are 3 to 5, and there are 3 K through 2. In that environment, with fewer schools, even if fifth graders are still in elementary school, but there were fewer schools and there were more students per school, would you feel like that would also allow you to offer more of those differentiated experiences for fifth graders, similar to doing in the middle school?
It would. I mean, it wouldn't be the same, but it would be still be having more of them to be efficient with staffing.
Right. I think that would be the only drawback, I would think, is the staffing piece, because then you have them split between 5 sites.
3 sites.
as opposed to
3 sites.
essentially-
3 sites.
I'm throwing in the middle school also, so you have 2 middle schools. So essentially, world language, you have it at 5 sites. Or if you're thinking of STEM, those STEM labs could be expensive, if you're thinking of 5 sites. I mean, that's the only drawback.
But then you would be able to offer world language and STEM to 3rd and 4th graders too, right? So
True.
wouldn't that be like a positive because we could introduce it at a younger age?
Right, you might be able to, again, it goes back to, again, FTE, staffing, those types of
Okay.
things. Yeah, Back to- instructional minutes too. So like as great of an idea as it is, then the instructional minutes are set in stone right now unless we renegotiate the contract and renegotiate the school day. So like if you were, for example, add in world language or add in STEM above and beyond what kids are already doing, it's at what cost? Like what gets taken away? Literacy minutes, math minutes, science minutes, recess, like it's those kinds of things that then have to be weighed upon. So it's more integrated, but it wouldn't be just, oh great, there's a lab, 3rd, 4th, 5th graders all can have access equally and you can just have it in all of our places. So it becomes challenging, but it is possible.
Are those things only addressed when contracts are negotiated? Or are those kinds of things, like the allocation of minutes, only addressed during contract negotiations? Or can they be reassessed?
Well, teaching minutes, essentially like the workload has to be bargained.
Okay.
And that comes up next year, right?
2 years.
2 years, okay. So by the time any configuration is coming out, probably the contract is coming out almost simultaneously, hopefully, in an optimal world. Right. Okay, and then going back to,
I will say though, I want to add one more thing for world language specifically. We really would want to think about things so that it's actually like purposeful. Before we had elementary world language offerings, but I don't remember the exact time. But if we're thinking about students just having Spanish one time a week for 30 minutes, that really isn't, they're not going to benefit from that. So, I mean, I think that's when we have to think about, even though we really support students learning a second language, you have to really think about, are you going to invest the time and money that it actually takes to, you know, actually learn that language. So what might be good for 5th graders through 8th graders might not necessarily be the best for our younger students if we're not going to really invest the time and money.
I had a question when you were talking about critical mass in 5th grade. Is that is critical mass achieved just in a single campus model? Or is there a critical mass that you can achieve in 2 middle school models?
You can do that in 2.
Okay. And then when you do 5th graders in middle school, is there a day where they're with one teacher, or are they kind of migrating like the 7th and 8th
So
graders?
that's a great question. think there's a couple things. I was just at a meeting on Friday about Illinois licensure. And if you run 5th grade, like a traditional 5th grade, our teachers just need a elementary license. But if you run 5th grade, like a junior high, where people are moving to math, science, social studies, then our 5th grade teachers are going to need an endorsement for all those content areas. That would be a major shift. So I don't know if we would be ready to jump into that shift just yet, if that's where the community wants to go, because we wouldn't have, I don't believe we would have our staff prepared to have all those endorsements that would be needed.
So when you did,
I want to understand this better. So do they need an endorsement just for the area that they're going to teach, or for each of the areas that
Just
are
the
in?
areas that they're teaching, but currently, right now, our 5th grade teachers teach like in an elementary setting. And I actually asked the question, like kind of thinking about like what happens if we build like a 5-6 building, and our 5th grade teachers just teach 5th grade like they currently do. Do they need endorsements in each of the areas that they're teaching? They said no. However, if we have students start switching and become content specialists, they would have to have an endorsement for each content that they teach. So for example, if someone's specializing in ELA and social studies, they would have to have a middle grade endorsement in social studies and ELA.
And is it reasonable if you're going to transition to this over a 2-year period? Is it reasonable to ask teachers to get endorsements in the areas that you want them to teach?
I don't think that's doable in 2 years.
It depends, and I'll tell you why. They're changing now to this middle grades license. It's going to be a lot more difficult for teachers to be able to obtain their endorsements. I believe that currently if they're a teacher right now and they try to seek that, they could get in before February 1st, 2018, before that changes. And right now it's like 18 credit hours, but after that it's going to be a lot more difficult. So it really depends on the person, how many credits they need to obtain their endorsement, and also life, family, and everything else. So I want to add to what Monica said. So the middle grade endorsement is essentially extra study in the area of adolescent growth and development that is above and beyond the content area expertise. You have to have so many hours in each content area in order to be able to teach it. So you're not only content specialist, but you're also adolescent specialist. And those are not exactly the same thing. You need both, but they don't come together.
Is that a more expensive teacher to hire with that endorsement?
That's a great question. Not necessarily, because sometimes people come out of school with multiple endorsements.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah,
If they need those extra hours, do we pay for those extra hours?
We have some tuition reimbursement, and we do actually, they do also earn credit towards like advancements in their salary schedule. So yes, both ends.
Can I clarify something you said? It sounded as if the concept would be to operate 5th grade within a middle school environment, but operate it as a 5th grade process. So it wouldn't be part of the middle school philosophy, it would be a school within a school? Is that?
There's 2 ways that you can go about
Right,
it.
because that doesn't make sense.
Right. One way is to have a 5th grade teacher who teaches all the cores like they currently do.
Right.
Like science, social studies, English, and math. The other way is to have them become departmentalized, where they're switching for all the content areas. You could do it either way, but if you have them start switching, becoming content specialists, they have to have the same type of endorsements as the 6th, 7th, and 8th grade teachers. And I don't know how many of them actually have that.
Right, so if you don't do that, then there's really no benefit of having 5th graders in a middle school.
Well, because you could still have
That's what-
the world language teachers would still need to have the proper endorsements, the CMA, the STEM, the band, chorus, orchestra, like all of those extras. Those teachers already have proper licensure.
One question, so just so I understand it clearly.
Alex, a little louder.
Sorry, at present, just so I understand it clearly, at present, there are no classes in the elementary schools before the 5th grade in which there are content specialists. Kids don't move at all with the different teachers for certain subjects.
No, they might switch for English, like they all teach English, and they might switch, areas, or they might switch for math. But in terms of content areas where they would need an endorsement for the content area, that's not necessary for the core.
Think about it like as a bell ringing. Like think about if a bell rings and all of the kids pick pick up their stuff and they all leave the classroom at the same time and everyone's going to different classes, then you need to be an endorsed teacher. You have to have a separate middle school endorsement, which is what Jen was talking about, where you have to have an endorsement in adolescent psychology and behavior. And then you also have to have whatever class you're teaching with, whatever 25 kids come in the door, you have to have that topic an additional endorsement. So every teacher has their, K through 9 certification to teach elementary education. Then every teacher who has kids coming in, like a rotating schedule, has their middle school endorsement, and then whatever content area endorsements they have. They can have science, they can have math, they can have whatever.
Right.
But like for a class where everybody's contained the same amount, like you can pull groups in, pull groups out, do that stuff, but as long as the kids aren't like, the bell's ringing, okay, class is over,
Right.
then it's different.
Yeah, and that's why I just wanted to clarify that, like, so right now, if this is fifth grade, 3 sections of fifth grade at one school, and one teacher teaches math all 3 sections, does that happen now? But that would require.
They are collaborating sometimes, so
Yeah.
depending, but it's flexible groups. So, everybody's all certified in all areas, so you're not like relying on one to do English
Right.
language arts and one to do math. And because they're dually certified, they do have some flexibility
Right.
with how they share students. And there are lots of people trying different flexible delivery models. Some are more more have an affinity for math. So like at the upper grade level, sometimes they'll split off where one will do math, one will do ELA, and it'll be flexibly grouped over time. But it's not like you have content specialists.
And the schools pretty much have autonomy to set it up that way if they want to now.
Okay, I'm sorry.
Yeah, one last one. Forgive me if you answered this already, but how much time realistically would it take in the best scenario to actually prepare for content specialists? Would you need 3 years or 4 years?
I'd say a minimum. It would be good to be able to give them a minimum of 2 years.
Minimum of 2.
Yeah.
And is that realistic though? That's a minimum.
I think it depends on when we give them that information, because when you think about like actual like course offerings and
Right.
things, like in terms of like, are we telling them, in the spring semester, are we telling them in the summer semester? It's when they actually have
Okay.
like, when they're given notice, and again, thinking about like giving them, it would be nice to be able to give them a fall, spring, summer, fall, spring,
So
Also-
maybe 2 to 4 years is
Yeah,
probably.
and also
You
something
said
else
some of them,
about
they
it.
already have some certification.
Yeah, there's plenty that might have. I'll tell you the areas where we're usually, where we don't have as many. Usually we have a lot in language arts and social studies. We usually don't have as many in math and science.
Also, you have to think about, I don't know how you guys do the tuition reimbursement.
Right.
That also could become a factor as well. I know my district has like a max.
Yeah.
So, and everybody has to divvy it up a certain way, but if everybody that has to quickly go and get endorsed, oh my gosh, we have to get endorsed in 2 years, that's gonna, yeah.
You're correct. We have the same limitations. Yeah.
So that could be problematic also by giving a 2-year limit.
But you did emphasize the potential hybrid model where you've got a fifth grade, whatever, and maybe your points made for more languages. So then you could potentially stretch this and say,
Right.
even though we've got fifth grade with the 7th, 8th graders, whatever, you'd have maybe, say, 3 years to do it.
Yeah, and
so.
you can grow into the model. You
Right.
could start with a traditional 5th grade setting and grow into more content specialists as well.
Okay, I think we've beaten this. So the next topic is class sizes. I'm going to turn this over to Adam.
Okay, so I think there's been a lot of questions as far as how important it is, the distribution between a two middle school approach, whether basically the balance between the middle schools. What value or was lost if they're equal size at about 675 apiece, assuming 6 through 8, versus somewhere closer to the 550, 800 balance. I almost wish I had a big pad here. We've heard McCabe a little bit, and I hope we can hear some more about the having sort of the 6 sections per day scheduling for the teachers, and with the middle school campus, the plan to have the 150 student pods, where you had essentially 450 kids per grade, 3 pods, so you had kind of this equal distribution there. and how the middle school philosophy then would be impacted if you had a school of 800 kids where it was 267 per year versus a school of 225 kids where it's 675 per year, all the way down to kind of that 550 where you have about 180 per year, and how that impacts the scheduling and the course offerings and how you have to kind of go about running the school.
Can I show the pancake breakdown of tree cutting from here? Nicholas, I just sent you an email.
Yep.
If you would check it out. The best way to describe this is that, again, it comes back down to how flexible are you going to be on the actual number of kids that sit in the class. So we always talk about these ranges. Like if you're hard and fast and you say, no matter what, 28 is the most kids you can sit in a classroom. If you get a 29th student, then that math class, that English class, that science class splits into 14 and 14. And in some cases, that's not good for the whole year that you only have 14 kids to work with. So it depends on how flexible it can be. Are you willing to go to 30? Are you willing to go to 31? We've had classes sometimes up to 32. But it's based on the kids with principal and teacher input, knowing the dynamics, because sometimes it's okay to run a class that size. So it depends on how much range you want to be able to allow yourself. So unlike elementary school, which is dependent on like a class size limit, in the middle school you really look at it as a class size like minimum, like how small will you go, as opposed to a class size maximum, because it's like what will you tolerate a science class at. And to date, because we've tried to have parity, and because we've been running middle schools at some places that are really tiny, like Elm Place, we've had to kind of acquiesce on that tightness a little bit, where we've got some very, very, very tiny classes, and others that are more towards what might be typical. So there's a couple understandings, and this is not hard and fast. This is just a way to try to physically explain what sectioning looks like, and where you have room to wiggle and where you don't. And please feel free to jump in. This is something that we put together earlier last year to try to explain this concept of sectioning. So the first thing is you have to understand that there are these kind of understandings at play, and that the NSEA, our bargaining agreement, requires that all full-time teaching equivalents or full-time teachers are given 6 sections a day, 6 periods a day in middle school at 1 or 42 minutes a day. And in English language arts, they're split over 2 periods because there's so much reading and writing that have to go on that they get 2 periods to do that work instead of just 1, okay? The second thing is, per the contract, each full-time employee is guaranteed 2 planning periods. So they have 2 periods to use for their own preparation purposes, and then there's also a duty-free lunch that's equivalent to what the kids have. The next thing is that Illinois School Code, as we've already mentioned, requires teachers to be endorsed in all the subjects that they teach. So if you're going to have kids in your classroom for a science class, you have to be certified in that science, with a science endorsement. Okay, so currently, and it's more for round numbers, because again, we have, once you make the schedule, as an administrator with your leadership team and with your teachers, you then start to finesse it. So it's like you try to put all the bricks in place, but then you're going to actually put a little bit more mortar over here, you're going to wiggle over here a little bit. So we use round numbers strictly for the sake of trying to understand conceptually where we're going, and then we fine tune and refine from there, okay? So we typically right now plan on 25 in a class just because it's round numbers, knowing that they could go up or down accordingly. This number could easily go to 30 kids per course, and it would allow additional flexibility in the range. The number of school sections are determined by the grade level. So like right now, we try to work it around 6 sections, and the reason we try to work around 6 sections is why?
Because there's six periods the teacher has to teach. 6
Right, so a teacher teaches 6 periods, and the kids have 6 academic courses. So 6 is kind of the magic number that you're working with in middle school scheduling. And in some cases, in order to preserve, quote unquote, middle school philosophy, for 6 sections on a team, we'll go down to 22 kids. Sometimes we'll go to 28 kids. Sometimes we'll go to 30 kids. Because in essence, it's that 6 section that's kind of the magic sweet spot. So these numbers are consistent. They don't require any special scheduling circumstances. And this is also not keeping in consideration, like if we have a year where we have special education resource courses that kids are being pulled out of. We also have to consider special education intensive courses, which means they have a replacement curriculum. Or sometimes in some of our buildings, if you have an English language, if you have an ESL student, sometimes they're pulled out, if they're brand new to the country, they're pulled out for an English block as well. So these numbers aren't hard and fast either. Okay, so the way that we work this out is the process is, first we determine what's our target class size guideline. Are we gonna go for 25, 28, or 30? Just ish. Then we determine the number of sections based on the enrollment. So for example, if the school is 450 at a grade level, then that would be, like, you take the school size and you divide by 3, and that tells you how many kids are in your grade level, right? Then you determine if that grade level size you feel is okay to be on like just a middle school schedule that has everybody on one team and you don't need to split it. So if you had like 300 kids on a middle school team, you might want to split it in half and have a blue team and a white team. If it's 155 or 160 or 180, maybe not. Because then you're not working with multiples of 6 again, okay? So the next thing you do is you determine the schedule and you weigh the pros and cons. So the way that we work this, and this is strictly for illustrative purposes, is that, as Monica had already mentioned, when people are certified, they're often certified, if they're going to be cross-certified or endorsed, in English language arts and social studies. And likely if they're in math, possibly with science, but it's not as likely a combination as the English language arts and social studies. And red, for our purposes here, means there's just extra sections hanging out there without a partner to glom onto. If you think of them like positive and negative, they connect. So what we did last year is we went through and tried to show you all the different section pairings. So if you have a 4-section middle school, for example, you can see that there are you need 4 sections total of English, which is really 8 because it's 2 periods a day, but for the sake of keeping things consistent, you have 1 teacher teaching 3 sections of English, and you have 1 teacher that's only teaching 1 out of 3. So that person's only a 0.33 FTE. You see on the green? Then you have your social studies. 1 teacher's teaching 4 out of 6 at 0.67 FTE, and that's all that we need. So if you think about it, you might be like, oh goodness, I want to try to find someone. But again, we don't shuffle teachers every year. It's what you have in your building. You want to see if there's a way to make that English teacher match up with the social studies teacher. So you'll see why those guys are green, is because that's 1 human being that's teaching both English and social studies together. On the other side, you have a math teacher that's only 0.67. It's not a full-time math teacher. It's 0.67 math teacher. And you have, you're going to need a 0.67 science teacher, but if you split it accordingly, you might be able to pair 1 full-time teacher, and you'll notice that the spillover is red, that there's a 0.33 science teacher out there that either is going to be a 0.33 teacher kind of out there by himself or herself, or they're going to have to cross grade levels and teach a different grade level. So I won't take you through each one, but the magic thing is that you want to try to see this scenario with the fewer colors possible, the least amount of colors possible. And if you have to have colors, you want ones that are green and yellow, you don't want red. Make sense? Yes. Okay, so if you just like kind of stroll through, if you look at a 5 section, you see a lot of people having to cross content. You got greens and yellows crossing content, and you have some part-time people kind of floating out there. Okay? 6 sections, what do you notice?
Perfect.
6 teachers teach 6 sections, and even if it's 23, 25, 28, 32, if you've got 6 sections, no one has to cross grade levels, no one has to cross teams, no one has to go cross content. It's like the perfect mix. So you're always wanting to think, how far can I stretch it to maintain 6 or 12, right? And then we went through. So 7 sections, guess what you start to see? You start to see a whole bunch of part-time people that are going to be piecemeal together, or having to cross grade level. Like in this person, in theory, they could teach a section of math, a section of science at 6th, 7th, and 8th grade level, if your schedule allows for it. But not always, doesn't always work out that way. Okay, then as you go down, you start to see, we did this all the way through 12. So as you start to kind of play around with numbers, this might serve as a guiding kind of document for you to kind of do your own code cracking around scheduling. But ultimately, the goal is to try to keep people together, because we know from just our own experience that when you have people that can plan together and teach together and have the same group of kids together for much of the time, that's when you're going to have the best bang for your buck. That's the gist. Feel free to.
So, Jen, as it kind of applies, to some of the models we've been looking at, everyone's kind of seeing colors a little light. On the spreadsheet that's gone around, a lot of them have shown a 550 and an 800 as it says it's in middle schools. That's kind of the number you're going to see under the BDR3 split. So at 550, it's 183 kids per grade level. So would that be kind of at your upper end of being able to maintain 6 sections, or are you at the point where you have to get to 7 there?
You're actually at 7.32 with a 28 average.
Right,
So
that would be about a little over 30 kids per.
So, or if you did like 28, like as your magic number, you're at 7.32, which ultimately means 8 at fewer kids. Or, but you also have to remember too that how far can you stretch it? Like 6 would be impossible with that. Unless there's a way to team. Sometimes you'll do 6 and then you'll have a half team, but there's gives on that as well. But those are, when you look at a 550 and 800, you have to remember that some of your ESL kids are going to come out of that equation, some of your special education kids are going to come out of that equation. So that's an inflated number in aggregate.
Okay. And then as far as if the schools are down here, the 675, it would be about equal size here, and then we're at 225, and that obviously would be too large. So you would end up in a split scenario.
So I did that if it would be like, I was just trying to play with, what was it, 266. No, it's not.
9 by 25.
225. So if you split that, it would be a team of 112 and of 113. Again, but less because special ed and ESL would probably be taken out of that equation. So you're actually looking at sections of 4 and 4 again.
4 and 4.
Right?
Mm-hmm.
Which is
Yeah.
not ideal because at the very least what's going to happen is you're going to have people crossing team.
So would you, in that scenario, then prefer to have smaller class sizes and go up to 12 sections where you have sort of 2 full small teams, even though it might cost more to staff?
Or if you think about it at 225 and 28, it would be 8 sections.
Okay.
So 8 is better than 4 and 4 in some ways when you're looking at like sharing human beings to share the benefit. Each scenario, except for 6s and 12s, has pros and cons, so it just depends. And that really isn't something that a team like this would ever really flesh out, because it's based on the principal and the scheduling team that's going to weigh the pros and the cons and the dynamic of that particular building on a year-to-year basis.
From your standpoint, assuming that most of the models that we're looking at, I think all of them at this point are 2 middle school models, is there a split that you would think would work the best in terms of the number of students to split between 2 schools? In terms of, of these options that add on this?
I think you kind of have to look at, again, because one of the considerations that we held here was to maintain current class sizes. If you choose that class sizes really isn't that big of a deal and you can go 30, we might have some more play. I really think that if people are going to start fleshing this out, I don't have an answer to that question. I think it depends on what the class size numbers end up becoming, and then you kind of backwards work off of that kind of scheduling chart so that you can do your own pro-con analysis.
But it's also a question of value of, are you basing it on pure efficiency of staffing?
Right.
Are you being driven by the dollar, the class, what's your
Assume current class size. Current class size guidelines.
You want to get, well, you want to have as few people crossing, and you want to have the fewest number of part-time teachers that are kind of like singletons that are just out there, having to travel buildings or having like hodgepodge schedules. So if you look at it, I mean, I would say multiples of 6 obviously are the best. It looks like 10 is better than 9. I mean, like you have to kind of look at, again, it's not as clear as you'd like it to be. I don't know, do you guys have anything you can offer?
I think what's difficult is we always have to think about things in ranges, and you're going to have fluctuations in enrollments, fluctuations in course requests. The more sections you could have in any building, we've said this before, is better, because then you could have that much more grouping of courses, which helps with the scheduling with the teaming and so forth.
Is there any concern that one school is too small?
Yeah, you could definitely get too small in middle school.
What would be too small?
I mean, I would say,
One place.
yeah, currently all places.
I wouldn't go much under 500.
Currently, anything I would say under 500 is difficult.
What's on place right now?
Pardon?
What's on place right now?
330.
Motivated
So you would go under 540.
I wouldn't go much under
If
500.
we're talking about maximizing like efficiency and staffing, I wouldn't go under 500 for middle school.
And also being able
It's
to
not
have
saying
the-
that they can't run. I mean, currently we're running one well under that, but when we're talking about like maximizing efficiencies, I wouldn't go under 500.
Well, and also having
having
the robust cohort, right?
exactly, having more students so that your outlier students have a peer group. Right.
But
Just to
if
give
you
you-
had a 500 and an 850, given the fact that we've been targeting about 1350 in total, that's almost ideal. It would give you a 6-section and a 12-section.
Yeah.
Is that right?
Yeah. And I currently, just to put it in context, Palm Place is at 345, Edgewood's at 544, and Rockland's at 478.
I would just like to state also, and Jen, I don't want you to like take this the wrong way, but that I don't want us to get so locked in that we have to have like the six, that we're not able to come up with a plan because of that. I currently teach language arts and social studies. I teach 6th, 7th, and 8th grade. It's doable. It's not the end of the world. People do it all the time. That's how my school works. In an ideal world, if I worked at a bigger district like this one, I probably would only be teaching one subject unless life would be easier and planning would be easier. But you can do it, and people do it. And so I don't know that, like, I don't know if we like get hyper focused on we've got to have the 6. I'm worried that may kind of derail us in some ways. So just keep an open mind that people can be flexible. Teachers are flexible. Teachers are willing to plan. People want jobs, and people are willing. You know, it's not like they're gonna, not work at a school because they have to teach one section of 7th grade science and the rest 8th grade science.
Well, and I think, the other thing that already takes us away from 6 is that we're at, 7 sections of dual. And so, given our population, that's, it's a great complication, but it's a complication in terms of that metric.
Well, I was going to say this later, but one of the things that we talked about at our last facilities committee meeting is how much the dual language program, because it doesn't cover everybody in the district, is sort of forcing some configurations, and that if it was dual language for everybody in the district, it would be a whole lot easier to plan it. And one of the questions we had is, why isn't it dual language for everybody in the district?
Because you have no balance. You lose the integrity of the program without balance of
The
native Spanish speakers and English speakers.
Yeah, and one follow-up, at 28 kids per class in middle school, isn't it only 6 sections kind of dual? Not, because we have 7 sections, but it's like 22 kids in middle school, right? So do we have the capacity, if dual is all in one middle school, to operate on this plan?
And remember, don't conflate elementary paradigms with middle school. When you think of like 6 sections in dual, that's not 6 sections in middle school. It's the number of kids that make the sections in middle school because it's just one course in the middle. It's 3 courses, but Spanish, socialized, and PE.
Right.
So they just go to a Spanish-speaking socialized class, a Spanish class. So it's not like sections the same way as it is for elementary. They don't crosswalk.
So, just one, I'm afraid that I maybe missed the boat. Could you react to, there were numbers there, but they were not paired, 600 and 750. You have the 150 cohort multiple in 600, one facility of 600 and one facility of 750. That is not well designed for the sections that you were speaking of.
Well, let's go back to what Jory said. I don't mean monopolize. Feel free to jump in.
No, without mitigating what you were first saying.
Right.
Is it a poor model for that purpose?
No, to Jory's point, like people do it all the time. What we do know that as we look toward more interdisciplinary studies, which is contextualized, it's more like contextualized learning, when you can have a team of teachers that actually have even a little bit of time together to actually plan what they're doing together, it can do really good things for children. And so so the outcome, again, not that they can't do Excel, allow me to make anything work.
Right.
People do it all the time. But if you're planning for the ideal and it's not the
Right.
backup, you should be planning for collaboration space in there, because we know that, for example, Finland just got rid of all of its subject matter, and they're doing all interdisciplinary problem-based learning in all of their work. But if teachers can't work together, that's a dream. Never gonna happen. So I think you have to weigh that. So to your point, I'd have to do the math. 700 divided by 3 is what? And
Well,
then you have to
actually,
figure
it
out the
was
sections.
750 and 600. I have a particular reason for asking that.
Okay, well, why don't you keep asking and I'll do the math and I'll.
Well, no, that's it. You know, so a response to that sort of.
So I just had a question about the 800, 550. So you're saying that under BDR3 you probably have 6 sections at Northwood and 12 sections at Edgewood? And so, and how many sections are you running in middle school right now? And I guess that sort of obviously leads me to thinking financially, are the savings from closing middle school then in the, obviously the administrators and then the specials like band and things like that, is that where you come up with those?
Well, to give you an idea, it's hard in order to I'd have to sit there and count the sections because, middle school schedule looks so different than elementary because there's all these courses. But to give you an idea, I'll just give you an idea in terms of Elm Place, okay? All the students take creative arts. So everyone takes music, art, CMA and STEM. And to give you some of the numbers, this is what we're looking at, and this is where you would have some of the efficiencies. Let's just take the 6th grade. One of the creative arts, we have a class of 8, we have a class of 7, they're on quarter systems. We have a class of 12, we have another class of 8, we have a class of 17, we have a class of 8.
Okay. So you're not saving in English or math, you're saving it in...
No, we will,
Okay.
also in English and math, we will.
Okay.
Because essentially you're maximizing the efficiency of the number of students in the classes. Some of these classes are very small. Some of them though might be to give you an idea of let me give you an idea of a core class though. You could have, sorry, I'm looking at their schedule. Here, in English, we actually reduced FTE last year when we saw the enrollment declining.
Okay.
For an English in one of the grade levels, and this is just English. This isn't the accelerated English or anything. 20, 20, 22, 21.
So Dan, let me try to take a crack at that too. So even though we're saying it's for example, at Elm Place, the class is 100.
Are you operating 666 into the 3 middle schools right now?
666.
Edgewood's too big.
Okay.
Teachers teaching 6 sections.
Okay. Okay.
Okay. So let's just say for the sake of using Elm Place as a real example, let's say with 100 students, 25 each, which is still lower than the guidelines, that's 4 classes, right?
Okay.
They have to go through 6. And when you have an accelerated English and an accelerated math, and you don't have multiple times in the day that you can offer it, you're going to be offering, even though they only require 4, just to get the courses in, you might have to offer 5 or 6 classes every period. So you're no longer efficient. When you have more classes to spread kids out by, you can actually be more tight to your guidelines. But we can't even run efficiently at Elm Place right now because we have to offer those classes to have a parity of experiences between one school and the next.
Okay, thank you.
When we talk about sectioning, that's really sort of an elementary distinction. Just to clarify for everyone, when we think about sectioning, it's really a question that's germane to elementary school. When it comes to middle school, it's students per grade. So really what we need to solve for is the feeders, if we're going to have balance, whatever we decide balance means, right, in middle school, then it's really determining what the feeders are in order to work towards a consistent class size per grade at the middle school level.
And there is sectioning in the middle school, but the difference is that sectioning in elementary happens by the class, and at the middle school, sectioning happens at the course.
Got it. That's helpful.
Are we ready to move on to the next subject? Any other questions? Okay, so the next question is, at one point we moved from 20 sections in the elementary schools to 19 sections. That was a recommendation from the cabinet, but we never got a full explanation as to why that was.
I think that was based on the decline in enrollment, but I think you're okay, if you want to use it as a range of 19 to 20, there's going to be variations in enrollment year to year.
Well, I think that's the key there, is understanding that there will be fluctuations. So if we say that on the relative high end, we expect, to plan for 450 kids, at 20 sections, you're at 22 and a half kids per, assuming a perfectly even distribution, 22 and a half kids per class. At 19 sections, you're at 23.6. Right? So you're not talking about a material difference. The most important thing to do, if we say, well, we don't need to plan for 20 sections across the board, is to make sure that we just have those bubble spaces, because you never know which school in which particular year is going to have that jump. And if you have a rise, it's not going to be perfectly evenly spread, where you can say, well, we could just, add, have a 26th kid in a class this year and we're okay. There may be a jump, and you just may need that extra classroom. So, I think
the thing to keep in mind is that at our high, which is about 4,400 kids, we are really talking about 490 per grade level. And at our elementary K through 2, we're talking about 21 sections if everybody is divided perfectly, and we have 23 kids per classroom. So we have to have that bubble space available in our buildings to accommodate those extra classrooms, depending on what areas pop and what ones don't.
So would you prefer it to be 19 in bubble or 20 in bubble? Because if you just said that there might be a year where you have 21, then we really are looking at a 20 with a bubble, right?
Yeah, but I think you're probably okay in that sense if every building has some bubble space. If you plan to say, we are going to build, and we're going to do boundary for 20, then you're going to be spreading the kids a little thinner, you're going to be generally less efficient. I'm not sure if it's necessary over, one kid, an average of one kid.
Well,
per
as
class.
long as we stick to the assumption that boundaries are periodically reassessed.
Exactly.
Class sizes are a little more flexible.
That's not going to happen too often, because redoing boundaries is a very, very controversial issue in this community.
Sure, but doing it.
I think we've leveled the
But
field.
doing it every 10 years instead of every 20.
But every 10 years is a long time. Yeah. I mean,
But
that's
a
all
lot
I'm saying.
happens.
A lot happens
You
in
have
10
fewer
years.
schools, which makes it infinitely simpler than when we have as many schools as we have now.
Yeah,
So-
without a doubt.
And I think this boundary issue is because you're shutting schools. It's not just that you're moving people kind of like to the neighboring school, but you're shutting, several schools that are moving significant.
There's also ways to address the boundaries by phasing them in, so that, you get an issue with siblings going to different schools, and that can be a real issue. But you can phase it in.
Without a doubt, Art. All I'm saying to you is that when you change boundaries, it becomes a really divisive issue in the community. So when you're planning the school, as was pointed out by the cabinet, the numbers fluctuate. Okay, you take a point in time, you pick your number, you look at the highs, you look at the lows, and you try to have a balance that's going to give you the flexibility to take in the high, and also the ability that you're not totally with useless space when you're at the lows. So, we've got ideals, but to focus on the numbers too much is probably a mistake, because those are going to change. They're going to change grade to grade and year to year. They have always done so, and they will continue to do so as long as people move in and out of the community.
I think a big part of the divisiveness I think a big part of the divisiveness with changing boundaries is because it's been done relatively infrequently.
That's right.
And I think if you're doing a boundary change like clockwork every 10 years, or at least looking at it and examining it, like after we've accomplished this first one, then all of a sudden it's not a political thing, or it's not some particular.
It's anticipated.
It's
That's right.
anticipated.
Yeah.
I think there's transparency, and that's I think a big.
But
factor.
it's just not as simple as you make it out to be. You can plan for it, you can say we're going to do it every 10 years, just like we redraw congressional boundaries every 10 years, and look how smooth that goes.
Ken's correct, there's always a reason in the future not to do it.
Yes, and 10 years is you've got another generation of students in the classes in the district. But just understand, even if you say we're gonna do it every 10 years, which is something that a number of school boards have recommended over the years,
How'd that go?
even if you do it, it is controversial.
So here's a question for the cabinet. So in a previous board meeting discussing declining enrollment, there was a question of whether our numbers, which aren't insignificant, have declined in the last 1 or 2 years, if it is being mirrored in neighboring districts. I don't think there was a definitive answer to that I recall. So have you seen the same patterns, say at District 38, District 36, 37, 109, 67? They had the same percentage drop off?
So we don't know specifically about our neighboring districts, but it is statewide.
It is declining as a state.
But we don't know about on the North Shore, what it looks like.
Not every district has done enrollment projections to the level that we have, so even when we've asked them for that information, they don't have that projected that way.
And is the state decline similar in percentage terms to the decline that we're seeing or projecting here?
I don't know, John Petsky is our enrollment person. He's not here tonight. We can certainly find out.
Okay, ready to go to the next subject? So dual language magnets. With the middle school campus, you guys had been planning on not using dual language magnets. With DDR3, you are using dual language magnets. And the question is, what is the trade-off and reasoning for going one way or the other?
You know, one thing that we said was from the beginning that we can make anything work. We had an interesting start to our school year where we actually we started our first day of school without a couple of teachers for dual language. They're difficult positions to find. And so when we talked about the language academies, we did talk about having a place where we would have not as many, but we could look for quality instead of just fulfilling an open job. It's just increasingly getting difficult with other districts and their salaries being able to find people. So that was one thing that we looked at.
The other piece is the singleton concept. So by having a magnet in our current building, with our current building constraints, the rationale initially was also based on the fact that you wouldn't be able to grow the program. So if you determine that 2 were magnets, like right now, as planned for BDR, Red Oak and Oak Terrace, this basically caps what we can offer for dual. Whereas if you put it at 2 sections at Wayne Thomas, 2 at Indian Trail, and 2 at Red Oak, for example, just to use any old schools, as long as you have a teaching partner, that was kind of what we were shooting for, that you were never going to be a singleton. And that way, if for whatever reason there was a 7th section or an 8th section with those bubble classrooms or those flexible classrooms, you could always pop a 3rd section of dual at any of those campuses, and you could have a little bit more flex with the number of kids you could allow into the program. So one, it was meant to offer that flexibility in enrollment, but it was also intended to diversify the experience. Like if we believe that dual language experience is a good experience for all kids, then why not have it in multiple buildings and offer that as well? When we got down to brass tacks with BDR and we were looking at the way that we were functioning, we couldn't make it work in multiple buildings and still hire high quality people and still keep the singleton versus, someone was going to be a singleton in any scenario because we don't have a lot of 4-section buildings. And then there was an issue of boundaries. If you only go into the 4-section buildings, which are Indian Trail and Wayne Thomas for the most part, am I missing one? Then you ended up stacking all of your bilingual and dual language programs in one end of town. So there were a lot of factors that we had to consider, and at the end of the day, it was we said it could go either way, and our board really leaned towards dual language magnet centers.
So let's forget BDR3 for the discussion purposes. If we had a configuration that was all 4-section schools, what would your preference be in terms of how you handle dual language?
I think that's a difficult question to answer because I think part of it goes back down to the staffing. It's not just the teachers, the dual language teachers. We're thinking about like bilingual secretaries, we aim for bilingual administrators. I think that's difficult. I know that CPS years ago really wanted to put a lot of dual language schools into, their schools. They couldn't necessarily find the staff to be able to staff those programs. So I think I don't know if it's fair to ask that question. You have to think about what's idealistic and what's realistic. I don't know if we.
Well, but I'm asking for realistic, so I wasn't asking what your preference is in the ideal world. What I'm hearing from the three of you is that the magnet school solves the staffing problem as much as it may deal with convenience for students. So the answer may be that because of staffing constraints, whether you call it a magnet school or you just say you're putting them in these schools because we can't get enough staff to distribute them evenly throughout the district, that's a program requirement that we have to think about when we do the configuration.
Yep, and that was identified early on. The only negative to that approach, which is very valid and something we've talked about, is that you cap the number of kids that can join.
So isn't that already capped though by the number of?
Well, for right now, but if we grow a population, I mean, in the way that the pedagogy kind of the research shakes out is that you don't necessarily have to run balanced programs, but our community feels very strongly that we must run balanced programs because we want to make sure that we're racially, for the most part, equal. So if the community really more exposure to it and they are allowing more 60-40 or even 70-30 either way, you can still run a dual language program with integrity, but that's a give. So it really depends on the population. We don't know if we'll continue to have an immigrant population. We don't know any of those things. So it was really built in as a flexibility model. But you're right, in today's world with our kids today, we're probably going to be capped at around 6 or 7 sections. It was just something to think about for the long term.
Well, one other point that I want to
think it's fair to say, given the lack of development sites within the school district boundaries, that the odds of having a significant change in the mix of residents is not great. We're not expanding the housing stock substantially. So when you say if we had a larger immigrant population, you're still looking at a population that's going to stay relatively stable unless there's a big change in birth rate.
Or you build new housing in Highwood.
But even in Highwood, there isn't much development plan.
So Michael, you're getting at what's the potential impact of this capping phenomenon, right, with the facilities, and sort of mapping that against what would be the changes in the demographics that might cause it to be an issue. But I think part of the piece that I feel like there's a lot of discourse outside of this group about what is dual language, and I hear, you hear terms like optional program and stuff like that, and I from what I've learned about it, it was introduced not as an enrichment program for the English speakers, but as a way to integrate a population within Highland Park that has greater need and needed to be, and this is the most effective way to do that by creating that dual language, better than just full immersion from a pedagogical perspective.
Yeah.
So I want to just make sure that's actually stated publicly, because I think a lot of folks think of it as kind of like an optional bonus program. And then the second piece is, from what I would take away from this, if you want to kind of maximize the dual language program and you want to do it in the most cost-effective way possible, this magnet issue actually speaks to cost effectiveness. It's not just about being able to fill the room with staff, fill the building with staff, but if you want to have the kind of staff that will really deliver the full impact of the dual language program, the most cost-effective way to do that is by having them all in one building as opposed to scattering them around the district.
Well, and the other piece of it is that you don't, if you aggregate the program, then you don't have these kind of sectioning artifacts in your mono programs on those same sites. So if you have 2 dual and 2 mono and you pop a section, then you don't have the flexibility to move a mono child to dual and a dual child to mono. So that's a major complication in terms of where we are now, and where if you look at certain facilities, how we have very imbalanced class sizes from site to site, dual is a factor in that.
Which really speaks to cost again.
Absolutely.
So thinking about why it came about to create resources for the underserved population that doesn't
To close the achievement gap.
Yeah.
To close that achievement gap, and to do it in a magnet format is actually more cost effective and flexible, not only for the dual language students, but also for the monolingual students. Because as you point out, you might end up with 1 or 2 students too many, and you pop a section of monolingual, then you're going to have very few students, which we see today in my child's school at Sherwood, where we have monolingual with really under, numbers that just don't make any sense.
Which gets back to the boundary issue we were talking about before, is if you don't, as we have been redrawing them frequently, you end up with the situation we have in Sherwood and Red Oak with the very, very small set class sizes. So I think our understanding is you guys want to move toward a model that gets us away from that, no matter what we do.
Just a question on the magnets. Are you concerned at all that it takes away from bringing that population in with the rest of the community? Is it a concern that there might be an isolating factor by putting all the dual in one location separate from the monolingual sections?
Yes, that is a good question, and that is something that I think many of us have expressed concern about. And I think the fact that we have a 20-year robust program puts us in a slightly different position than if we were just starting. The fact that Oak Terrace has no problem filling its English-speaking family seats at Oak Terrace is a testament to that kind of program belief and confidence. The tricky part would be, though, is that there are some people who have conveyed through this whole process to each of us in their respective ways that is disenfranchising insofar as it does other the dual language kids. So again, you have to weigh the pros and the cons. I feel pretty good about being almost 21 years in, that we have enough. Like this year, we got a waiting list for our English-speaking families. So I could assume probably safely that next year that same drive will be there, but we don't know because the dynamic has changed and there's no way to really fully anticipate how people are going to react to a dual language school versus a dual language program in a Highland Park school that feels more monolingual. I don't know.
Raphael, I'm really glad you brought up the dual language topic, that we have to offer a program to our native Spanish speakers, because I think oftentimes we hear people question why are we running dual language, and some people even think of it as an expensive model. But even if we didn't have dual language, we have to offer bilingual or ESL services, and this is the best model to offer, and it benefits our monolingual English speakers as well.
Well, and it seems like the class sizes in dual are much more efficient than our mono class sizes. So I think that that's what we need to solve for. It's like dual is running pretty efficiently in terms of the student staff ratio. And even in terms of like facility usage, it's this kind of artifact that it's producing given the current configuration now with these small mono sections.
But when we're oftentimes talking about like what do we want our district to be known for, how do we want to set ourselves apart when we're talking about full day kindergarten, we're talking about world language or fifth graders. Having a dual language pre-K-8 program sets us apart from many school districts.
Definitely.
Many have dual language and in fifth grade. This is like the model that you see in international schools across the world, and they pay a lot of money to go to those schools in different countries. So like when we talk about what do we want to think about like our idea, our ideal community, our ideal school, it really should continue to encompass this dual language program.
And the testament is in your numbers on the program.
And then Rob, just because we're off being videotaped, I think it's important to just make sure that everyone really understands that it wasn't initially set up as an integrating effort at all. Because you're required to offer services to kids from Spanish-speaking homes until you reach a certain level of proficiency in the English language, you must share services with those children. And so we know from research that's been replicated time and time again that the very best model to closing that achievement gap is through a dual language model. So ESL kids fall off after several years. They very rarely make it. Our bilingual students are even faring poorly as well. So it's really this dual language or one-way immersion that in the research across the country are the only two that make it over the line. So our kids, we want to set them up for success, and to our credit, in 20 years of research and data, our kids have closed the achievement gap. So when you compare, they are performing like their monolingual peers better.
We have some of that data in our minutes from the meeting where the education committee met with the superintendent's cabinet. Jen and I worked together on putting in a graph from a Colliers and Colliers study that's in the minutes where you can visually see the different levels of, ESL, EL, whatever you want to call it, comparing the different tracks or different, offerings. And it's in our minutes.
But just to clarify, if we were to cap the program, like a hard cap in terms of sections, given our current demography and given the mandates, the charge of the district, we would not be shutting out Spanish speakers, correct?
No.
We would be shutting out English speakers.
Melissa, if any configuration going forward modeled a magnet dual language, let's say in two schools, something similar to what's going to proceed, one in the south and Oak Terrace in the north, would that make the grade center plans basically impossible? You wouldn't have the pairs.
Yeah, I think it would be a different configuration. I think it wouldn't work the same. I think
It wouldn't even allow for grade centers.
we wouldn't have enough probably buildings left to make it
So,
work well.
I think that's something we should all note, that if you use, or I think if that's what it is, that's what I'm hearing, that if we considered something in a new configuration that had a magnet feature to the dual language, or assigned specific schools that were all dual language, so that they would have the cohorts that that school would need as well, or those kids need as well, more than one section, more than 19 kids, for instance, at Red Oak right now, or 18 altogether in the program. That's, I think, what the incoming is. Then we won't have a grade center in that market.
It would have to be K5 or K4.
Okay, it would be the one I've been discussing.
Right, those would be two different configurations.
All
In the grade
So it
configuration
would have to be
programming,
K.
you're able to combine them because you have fewer grade levels per building. You don't have to separate out the dual language program into a separate building. It would go together. You would have, at the Oak Terrace Indian Trail pairing, you would have 4 sections of dual and 4 sections of mono, because you would only have 3 grade levels per building. So you wouldn't have to pull out the dual language program into magnets.
So
You would be
keep
able to
going
keep
with
them
that, and
together.
then Sherwood would have 3, and Red Oak would have 3.
So like Sherwood and Red Oak would have three dual and 3 mono, and then, or 4 mono, and then over at Brayside and Ravinia, you would just have the 4 mono. So you would basically
Wait, they would
have,
have 3 and
you would
3,
have
so
4
they would have
monolingual
6.
sections at each pair. So the monolingual would be balanced.
You would have 6 at the time.
You
of
would not
school.
have any 2-section.
You would not have any 2-section program.
Actual or de facto. I think that's the big.
And
that's the big thing.
if the southeast school stayed in some size that they are, so you could have the pairing. You would have enough mass of population for each to do it as well.
But
Correct.
you'd have 4 dual language schools as compared to 2, is that right?
So that's something I think.
4 buildings.
That's what
Yeah.
I mean.
I think that's
That's
actually
a
something
good
we would
point,
like to
Sarah.
hear from the administration
wouldn't be
about,
all
in terms of what that would look like. That
Only
that
2
the
would be okay.
grade
But you end up
configuration.
with 4 buildings, houses.
Let's have one conversation.
Yeah, the grade
It's like-
center,
it's like it's
the
written
grade
out,
configuration
right?
plan would have 3 grade K-2, 3 K-5. With dual language, it would be split then. Still.
Guys, I can't hear what Alex is saying.
So one of the plans that we've discussed is the kind of the grade center on a plan where we'd have 3 K-2 schools, 3 K-5 schools. And the idea that would be dual language would be at 2 of those. There'd be an Indian Trail and Oak Terrace pairing, Sherwood Red Oak pairing. There'd be dual language that would exist at both those sites. Do you guys feel like that would be still a good way to offer the dual language program?
So there's to be 2 elementaries per dual?
4 buildings.
2 K-2 and then 2 3-5. And so the idea would be if there was 8 sections total between Oak Terrace and Indian Trail, one of them would be a K-2 school, one of them would be a 3-5 school. You'd have 4 sections of dual, 4 sections of monolingual. And then in Red Oak and Sherwood, you could have the same thing. You'd have 3 sections of dual, maybe another 4 monolingual. Would that allow you to
great.
And then a middle school, so it's 5 dual language sites?
No, 4.
Including the
Oh,
middle school.
including
Including the middle school.
Including middle school.
Yes. So it's not different, it's not that different from what you're staffing
Really
right
keeping
now.
them together.
Yeah, right.
I mean, from a sectioning perspective, that's a really nice model to have, K2, you have 7 or 8 sections per grade level at those. You can really focus in and have lots of age-specific, developmentally appropriate activities from that level. From a staffing perspective, it becomes a little more difficult because then we're trying to find administrators for, Oak Terrace, Indian Trail, Red Oak, Sherwood, and
No,
middle
that's it,
school.
in the elementary school. That would be it.
Well, they
Four.
count.
And the middle
school.
They count.
Oh, in the middle school, yes, I'm talking about the
It just,
elementary school.
to find, Monica said,
4 out of 6
qualified and really strong administrators who can actually speak to half of their population is a little bit more of a challenge. From the sort of community standpoint, I like it.
Yeah.
I mean,
Yeah.
it really
This
gives
goes back
lots
to
of
the
opportunities.
ideal versus
So-
realistic.
How much-
Ideally, it sounds great.
So globally speaking then, thinking about the impact of the K-2 in a single building, you have to hire potentially up to twice as many Spanish-speaking administrators, right? Because you now have 4 sites going at the same time at
Right.
the elementary level instead of just 2.
Right.
But you also have some efficiencies coming from having K-2 and 3 to 5
Yeah.
in their own building.
And from my perspective, as somebody in charge of special education, it's great to be able to focus. You know, our special ed teachers, some of them have to teach 6 grades right now because our buildings are so tiny, and it's really hard for them to become experts in 6 different grades. Having them more concentrated really gives the teachers a much more familiarity with the curriculum and really allows them to provide much more targeted intervention and support and services.
So it's not as measured, just sort of follow up on that. So it's I guess the way you're articulating it is we can see a direct cost impact in the incremental cost of hiring more administrators who could speak Spanish, they're more qualified, right, or bilingual. But on the side of delivery, you wouldn't necessarily see it in terms of a salaries perspective in a grade-centered approach, but you would see a quality difference from being able to focus within a narrow age range for specialized teachers, et cetera.
I think there's benefit to that.
Kristen, in terms of the way in which our self-contained programs are currently sectioned, is that the break? So that's already the way that it works, though,
Yeah,
right?
they're already sectioned in K2 and 3-5 because you can't have in a special education self-contained class, you can't have more than 4 grade levels together. So there's age ranges that are not allowed. So we do K2 and then primary and then.
So structurally, this wouldn't change anything?
Not at all.
How we do that?
It would add an additional transition, which is always, you know, a concern that people have. I did come from Glenview where that's the model that they have, and the extra transition is just something that you do. It's not a big deal. They do some things like the PTO for a grade level pairing is together. So parents are, you know, both of the schools participate in all the PTO, PTA activities. You know, there are just, all the kids transition together. It's a pretty normal and natural thing.
From a feeder pattern perspective, if you did the grade centers with dual language in the 4 schools, then you're going to have to take kids from Sherwood and Red Oak. Some of them are going to have to go to Edgewood, and some of them are going to have to go to Northwood. From a community perspective, how big of a deal is that?
I think if you're upfront with people on the front end, that's no different than what's happening right now.
Yeah, that's what's
Yeah.
happening. When you're in language, you go to North.
I realize that's the way it is now, but
Right.
are people okay with it?
So back to Monica's point, when you are getting to those upper grade levels now, no longer is it just about being truly a bilingual teacher or someone that can speak Spanish and is elementary endorsed and has a type 29, which is for Spanish, or a bilingual certification. By the time you get to middle school, you also have to have those contact expertise and that middle school endorsement. So it's even more difficult. And we have to remember that dual language looks and feels very different at middle school than it does at elementary, because it's just like everyone's together all day long and you just happen to go to your dual language Spanish class, just like an honors class, or you go to your, you know, your dual language social studies class, and it doesn't feel any different for kids in their day. So it's really about the content expertise and the quality of the teacher at the middle school. So I don't think it'll feel any different. People kind of know that's going in, and we have had very little attrition from 5th grade to 6th grade for the last 5-6 years. Very, very few people don't come.
The nonlinear feeders also assumes that we're leaving our middle schools at relatively the same size they currently are, which isn't necessary. I mean, we're not talking configurations tonight, but it should be stated for our viewers at home that may or may not be a factor depending on how we sell for middle school.
But in the grade center-based configuration, why do you have to have dual language and 2 pairings instead of 1 pairing?
Because if you do it with 1 pairing, basically all of the kids in Marlboro from one entire part of town would have to
It's
go to
lopsided.
the totally other side of town. So for example, if you just had all of Oak Terrace and Indian Trail be the dual language pairing and have that be all dual, there would be no model elementary school for anything north of Central Avenue.
Right.
So
It's
that's-
also an
It's like a
opportunity
super
for
neighborhood.
If you look at the Colliers
Thomas and Collier.
at that study, there's all of this nice ancillary benefit for monolingual students.
I was asking the question, I should have expanded my question. I was just asking it from a very focused standpoint of staffing. That if you've got 4 sections in 2 pairs, and they're 8-section schools, you could put 8 sections in 1 pair, and then you wouldn't have to have twice as many administrative staff.
We don't have 8 sections.
Oh, well, we haven't configured it yet.
Well, close.
We don't have a grade center-based configuration at all.
No, I'm saying we don't have 8 sections.
But Michael, what you're saying makes sense. So put all the dual language students in one pairing is what you're saying, as opposed to having them scattered around. And I think probably the constraint around that seems to be around the physical movement of students around such a distance.
We
You
discussed-
displace monolingual students in order to do that.
We-
So
we
they
dis-
don't have a neighborhood school.
We discussed at the building committee, why don't we have dual language for everybody in town? I learned tonight that it's difficult to find enough staff and that you don't have the balance that you want. So I'm just asking questions tonight to figure out what we can and
We
cannot
go
look
back,
at
what
that
we
makes
can
sense.
do.
But to be fair, you theoretically could, instead of doing Sherwood and Red Oak, you could do Sherwood and Wayne Thomas as an elementary school pairing, all dual language. You could do that. But you would, I think the reason how the discussions have tended to veer away from that is because of moving students over such a great distance. And as Julie pointed out, you're displacing the monolingual students from going to the school, that might be near their neighborhood. So
I didn't say it was a good idea, I just asked why.
And I think what we want to understand is
You can
that
pair
we don't
school
want
any-
to ever
any
have a
summer.
monolingual population in any way sacrifice for an optional dual lingual program. So if you were to do it that way and create such a distance for a monolingual population to travel, that could be a sacrifice to them in order to create that dual language, pairing. So I think like the hard line is once you start making the monolingual population sacrifice something, that's where we really have to draw a stop.
But see if we gave them frequent traveler miles, and you could redeem them for an A in a class.
But I think the way we have to look at this though is, if you want dual language and you want grade centers, doing the dual language the way we're talking about, where you have them more commingled as opposed to completely isolated, allows you to reap the benefits of the grade center. So from an overall investment perspective, it's still net clearly positive is what I'm hearing.
And what we were talking, and I would like to put this to the cabinet, we've had this conversation at the education committee level, and what we said was, I think we all felt that in the logic of a K-5 or potentially K-4 configuration, magnets make good sense. But, with a lot of moving parts, there's a lot that makes good sense about regional grade configurations that would then foreclose the possibility of magnets. I don't know where you guys see that.
Should we pivot to the
Great centers.
Yeah.
Yes, and let's pivot relatively quickly because we also want to be cognizant of the time of our cabinet members. We did sort of say an hour, and we're an hour and 35. So we want to spend just a few more minutes on this and then let them go.
Right, so one of the points that came up at the board meeting, past board meeting, was that grade centers has been discussed within the community, and there's been a lot of opposition to it. My understanding was always that what was discussed previously was grade centers in the context of middle schools. So at least part of it.
No, I did some research. They had a previous grade configuration where it was K through 2 or 4 schools, and then 3 through 5 were 2 schools, and then 6 through 8 were 2 schools.
Yeah, it was 4-2-2, and it was not regional.
So it was still an 8-building model, but the split was different.
The split was different because there weren't as many parents.
And I
so
believe
kids were with the same group of students for a longer period of time.
From 3 through 8th grade,
Exactly.
you would have been with the same set of students.
And
then you
not
didn't.
And not only that,
You didn't have the regional. You didn't have the neighborhood feel
Right.
of the grade configuration. Whereas this grade configuration maintains the neighborhood feel because it pairs similar schools that are right next to each other. And the other nice benefit of this one is those students from K, they stay with the same student population from K through 5th grade. because it's just picking up the entire student population and putting it to the neighboring paired school. So while the board, or the previous board, thinks that it's the same thing, it's actually really different in the fact that our brainchild here came up with an idea where you're pairing these schools to attain your neighborhood objective, and you're maintaining the same size, so 3 to 3. So you're not creating any difference in the student population. They're going to know everybody they go to school with through that transition. So the only element of the transition for them is the physical building itself.
I would also want to ask, and I believe, and correct me if I'm wrong, that the extent to which this was pursued with the community was in the outreach meetings at the country club, where it was like an option on the little, I don't know what you call those things.
So I think we've done a good job of teeing up where some of us are coming from. Maybe we can kick it over to the table there and see what they
I think the biggest challenge that you have is something that we had, and that is just what is perceived to be as what is considered to be big change. And so, no matter what you call it or how you describe it, I think that one of the biggest challenges is just getting people to really understand what it is, because we understand that what you're describing is different, and it is, but it will still be considered to be big change for the community.
Yeah, and I think that's the educational piece that we need to be able to get out there and tell them this is what it is. Go look at Glenview, because Glenview does this. So if you want an example of it, and we have people that are in our schools that have taught at Glenview. Go talk to them about what they think about these things.
Glencoe also does it next door.
Mm-hmm. They're not as big though, right? I mean,
It's
small. They're tiny.
one group.
But like Glenview does the clusters. They call them clusters. We're just calling them paired schools.
Here's a question, a clarifying question based on what Julie's saying. It seemed to me that the board was suggesting that it would be difficult to return to some members of the board, to return to the community with this concept, because the community is rejecting the concept. We've spent a few minutes here indicating how this possible concept is different than that, and while I understand that you're suggesting that any change that's perceived as big change is difficult, would it be fair to say that you at the table recognize that what we are suggesting is different than what may have been rejected before, and therefore you would feel okay with us retesting that with the community? Because that's really the question, I think.
I would say I'm totally comfortable with you retesting, but I would argue that it does feel very similar, just because when it was pitched to CFAC originally, before it even went to the community, it wasn't determined what that would actually look like. So Bill Attia came from Glenview, one of the original superintendent who kind of invoked this change many, many years ago, and came and spoke to the group about how great it was. And so that concept didn't really make it out of the gates in any kind of like fleshed out kind of manner.
You didn't have buildings associated to yours.
Right. We didn't.
So,
And
like
then-
here, it's more, there's more concreteness to
There's
it.
more meat on the
And
bone.
there's some
Yeah.
familiar components in terms of the existing buildings and the community.
Right, and then it went to
neighborhood
the meeting with the community at the country club. Again,
Yeah.
not fleshed out, not defined, just concept based, so like to your point, testing a concept, and that received poorest scores. So that was kind of where I think that they were coming from, that it had been looked at, but by no means in any way
But
kind of.
not inflected with any specifics. as to
And
what-
also, think where things are now. That must be, what, 6 years ago? Is that correct? Something like 6 years by now?
2014.
Well, it's been nice.
Really?
It was
That
2013.
grade centers were
It wasn't
shown?
that long ago.
Oh my God. Well, I would say
A lot has
people
happened since then.
people are expecting change at this point. At that time, people were saying, no change or whatever, we like what we have.
Am I right in perceiving
The
that
mindset
others
is
we're
different
gonna
now.
jump into? I know
Yeah,
that
I
Jen.
think, you don't have to sell it to us, because
Right.
we know this configuration model works. We've seen our neighbors doing. I think the greatest challenge is the community, and it's, do they see this as different?
Right.
Is this something that they'll be able to view as somewhat of a compromise to the neighborhood model? But I think it's safe to say we feel comfortable with this model.
I think we're presenting this all in a negative light when it isn't.
I agree.
Because it's not a big change. It's the same kids in the same community They're just going to different buildings. I like Julie's comment. If we can figure out a way to present this, that we're saying it's a campus, it's not grade center based, it's two buildings that serve the same community. If we were building this new, we'd be building, all new, we'd be building one campus for each of the paired schools, and you'd have the K through 2 wing, and you'd have the 3 through 5 wing. We can't do that because we already have the buildings we have to deal with. So if we present it in a positive way, the only negative that I think the community could really come up with, which is valid, is that if you've got 2 kids that are straddling the break, you're going to be taking your kids to 2 different schools, whereas K through 5, they're together for a longer period of time. It's easier for the parents.
And I have friends in Glencoe who have 3 kids in 3 schools, and they've lived to tell. I mean, people do it.
So eventually, we have 3 kids in 3 schools here, because we have your, elementary, your middle, and your high school. So it's a natural thing when you have multiple kids.
Without getting too far into the weeds of the specifics, the question we're really determining here is whether it makes sense to continue to test the concept.
Yes.
Because that was the board's concern. And what I'm hearing is unanimous agreement that we should continue testing the concept. We can get into the weeds about what that'll look like later on. But I think we've come to a collective understanding that we should continue to work on this concept.
And
Does
then-
anyone disagree with that?
No, but I want to make one more statement. When we tested the concept in Sherwood through that presentation, it was interesting because there's a dual language population there, and not all of the dual language population is 100% behind these magnet schools. This is their alternative. And so anybody who doesn't like the notion of dual language really liked this concept because it gave them the opportunity to not have, the isolating factor that is kind of thrown into dual language. It allowed them to still be in a monolingual setting as well. So that was not an issue before in the prior testing of this. So it's kind of a really nice way to present to a community. It's whatever you want. You can do it this way or you can do it that way. Here's the benefits and the cons here, and here's the benefits and the cons there. And so I think it's a very different environment in which we're going out and explaining this, and it's also a very different concept.
But just the last thing, but you can't have 19 sections, then you have to be 20 or 18.
You're
Am I right?
fluctuating between 20 and 19.
Yeah.
No, wait, then explain to me the 19 because.
I can send it to you.
Okay.
I have a spreadsheet.
Just
Helen,
fine, I get you.
Helen,
Fine.
8, 7, and 4.
Uh-huh.
It's an 8, 7,
But
and 4.
how do you move the same population from a 4 if it's a pair?
No, it's not a 4, it's a 7 to a 7.
Because the K2 and the 3-5 are the same size. It's the same
I see
cohort
it.
moving from
I
one to
see
the
it,
other.
and you're just gonna like squeeze those buildings together and you see the 7.
Each
Okay, I got it.
each pair of schools has to have the
I
same
got it.
number of sections.
I got it.
But each pair of pairs doesn't have to be the same.
That's right. I see
So
that.
I just want to say that I think we have really benefited from having the cabinet here, and unless anyone has anything essential that they want to ask now, I'm going to be very respectful that we've kept them 45 minutes long. Excuse them so we can continue with the rest of our meeting.
Thank you, Kathy.
Thank you so much.
We want to
So I'm gonna propose that we kind of go out of order here. Unless, I don't know, how long is the education part gonna take?
But we'd like to talk to the architect.
Okay.
He's staying.
Okay.
So
And maybe John. John, are you gonna
Okay.
stick around?
Yes, I'll be here.
Thank you.
All right, so let's move on to the education section.
Okay. I do have, I put together just a couple quick slideshows with photos from the high school tour and from the Lake Bluff tour. We don't have to do that tonight, it's up to you. It was kind of going to be sort of the intro into the conversation about innovative spaces and how.
Does it have to do with our architecture?
Let's start with the 5A.
Okay, let's start with the 5A. Okay.
So I think what you sent, I think what you sent me, you put it into our slide. So it should be up there.
No, that's just our educational objectives. That's just what you asked for, the educational objectives. I shared with you a slideshow of the tour of Lake Bluff and a slideshow of the tour of the high school.
Can you share with Nicholas? Put it up on the screen.
I'm gonna take your computer.
Or you can get me to do it.
Yeah, or I can just plug it in over there too.
Yeah.
Most I
What's easier?
Yeah. Yeah, she does.
Yes. Oh, thanks. It's been a big week with my 2-year-old.
But I don't want this part to get too long.
Yeah, so yeah, let's
Let's
Do
start
that
with
first.
5A.
I think this agenda was somewhat aspirational. It grew as a
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
So I think for the next part of the meeting, education has a couple of issues they want, ideas they want to flesh out.
Will he done?
No.
Yeah.
So if we walked up there,
Julia, you can start or do you want?
I may make a retake.
Whatever you guys want.
Because
Well, I'm just going to do a quick recap of our tour of the Lake Bluff Middle School. Well, that's what I was asking. Do you want to
Yeah,
go first?
I just-
Okay.
okay.
Instead, Julie's going to go first.
Yeah. You know, we talked about 5th grade in the middle school on the educational side. Now we kind of want to know it from the facility side in terms of like kind of pegging John and Don with some questions with regards to, you know, the Northwood and the Edgewood site. The cabinet, or I'm sorry, the board has asked us to really consider how to get 5th grade into the middle school setting. And there just doesn't seem like a whole lot of places that we're looking at for middle schools or that we can really look at for middle schools. So, you know, we want to know from a architectural and site feasibility standpoint, where do we stand with pulling a 5th grade into the middle school at both the Northwood and the Edgewood locations?
Well, and I think to kind of preface it is, we know right now Edgewood can hold 800, you know, and within it could use a little addition to do so. I think the bigger question that you have specifically is the Northwood Wayne Thomas, you know, quote unquote campus, and can it be treated as a single building? And what would it look like to make it a single building without a ground up new construction? Obviously.
Well, even
you
as
can-
a single
well,
building, can it hold 5 through 8?
Like the site itself,
Right.
right? Isn't that what you?
Yeah, I mean, like, that's the bottom line question. Can that site?
Without
It's
wings,
with-
there.
Wait,
Without
without
wings.
without.
What?
There's 53 classrooms between the two schools. You got 26, 27 classrooms without being teachers' lounges and that kind of stuff. You got about 53 classrooms between them. You've got 49 at Edgewood. So 49 covers the 860 rate.
I think we said we needed about 66 or 70 classrooms for 1,000 kids.
Yeah, you're getting up into that number if you're going to hit.
So you're talking about either figuring out a way to connect the buildings plus add
Something.
13 or so classrooms.
Yeah, 13 to 15.
But if you're talking about that as a middle school concept, you're gonna have to reconfigure Wayne Thomas because you got bigger kids in there.
Yeah.
Right, we're just asking from a site feasibility standpoint, like, is the conversation even worth continuing about having 2 5th grade schools? Is that something that's even feasible with the properties that we have?
Northwood becomes a challenge, probably wrong now, the site becomes really a challenge, getting kids up, getting to 1,000 kids at a time.
You would have to put 1,000 children.
That gets to be a challenge in and of itself, just logistically, the parking, the play space, beyond the building capacity, you start to have a challenge.
John, that's even with new construction, if you had a new middle school there, that would be.
New construction would definitely help that, 'cause now you're pulling up a little bit more.
I think
you're
they're
pretty spread out between Wayne Thomas and you have a lot of footprint.
Helen, why are you saying this 3,000 students?
Well, because that's one whole day,
So
is
we're talking
50.
about Northwood and West Thomas.
It's 1,800 kids, 155 square feet.
Building on 100.
So it's
Doesn't mean
nice.
that both schools are the same size,
Yeah.
they don't all have the right same size.
I didn't say they were the same size, I said
What it is.
Edgewood is
As a
800-ish.
If you
That
Wait, can we have
Northwood
one
is 1,000.
conversation? There's like three
Yeah,
conversations
sorry.
going on. I think the public needs to know,
Helen, please.
the public needs to know this answer. Like, if Northwood Wayne Thomas site can actually be used as a site that can house a middle school that has 5th through 8th grade.
So, all right, so if you look at the piece of land right now, if you put a new construction building for 1,000 kids, would it be tight? Maybe, I don't know, maybe a little. Could you figure out the traffic and the flow with parking? Probably. The biggest difference is if you're putting new construction and you're seeking to do for 1,000 kids, you're seeking, 150 to 170,000 square foot building. You're going to do a two or three stories, and it's going to take up 80 or 90,000 square feet footprint. If you connect Northwood and Wayne Thomas as they stand now and do an addition, you're looking at 150 to 170,000 square feet on 150 to 170,000 square foot footprint. So you're taking up twice the space, which otherwise could have been used for parking and play space and to manage the traffic flow. And so I think that's your biggest challenge when you start to think about using it for 1,000 kids as it currently looks. So it's kind of one of those, it's a financial decision to an extent more than anything, because if you're going to level the building and build new versus connect them, you're probably talking about a $40 million difference.
And if you connect them, it's an extremely inefficient building.
Yes.
And we talked about this in the facilities committee. You still have the problem is we're going to put the K through 4 north side students.
You would take your population and rotate it the other way. It would be like your population
Throwing
goes
that
down.
out there as a question and answer. That's it.
Yeah, well, I mean, Wayne Thomas is a big facility, but it only houses basically like a 2-section population. So that completion of those students, moving up to Indian Trails is really no different than moving the Ravinia students to Indian Trail right now. So it's just, when you're looking at what our options are in terms of middle school sites, there just aren't a whole lot of options out there that are feasible.
Is there a way to access Northwood except from Summit?
North Avenue.
If we were to ever connect Wayne Thomas, we were to look at concepts that you could move property coming in off of, going to Wayne Thomas, and you can wrap it back to the property.
So what would be the access road from where?
They both be Summit.
So it'd still be Summit.
Summit.
And coming off of Summit, that'd be either North Avenue or off of Wayne Thomas.
There's another road though.
Or you can come from the south,
Yeah.
off of Prairie,
Yeah,
through the neighborhood.
there's another road.
North
So
Avenue
is
runs
another
east
access road?
and Summit runs north-south, both would provide access.
What is the second road? I'm sorry.
North runs east-west, and Summit runs north-south.
Yeah, but North Avenue doesn't run through Highwood, it stops purposely, a number of years ago.
Barriers.
Yeah, right past Northwood, the western.
So as a recap, if you're gonna put a 5 through 8 building on Northwood, you lose Wayne Thomas as an elementary school. And you would most likely, you'd have to build new, and you'd be building a 3-story building or a 3-story middle school building just to accomplish getting 5th grade into a middle school. Okay.
And what is your
And
reason
you
for
bring
wanting to
1,000.
consider? What is your reason for wanting to consider putting 5th grade?
We just want to be able to
We want to make sure that we cover all of our bases.
Yeah.
The board has asked us to consider.
I didn't ask that.
Okay.
I didn't ask what the board asked.
Well, you asked what our
I asked
reasons
what
were.
you
It takes lighting.
I asked why you think it's a good idea if you do.
I'm not saying that. I'm trying to vet this idea through, the board has asked us, there's people in the community that want to know this question. So let's ask it, and let's get it to the dead end.
Well, we spent the first part of our meeting talking about the pros and cons of 5th grade and middle school, so we need to at least see whether or not that's feasible. If it's not feasible, then there's no point in continuing that conversation.
I mean, the debate or discussion, at least what we had today, was there was no obvious benefits or detractors.
Right.
Right, but I'm just trying to say that, you know, like, as we're going through all these, eventually we hit a wall with some of the ideas, right? And once we hit that wall, it's unfortunate, but at the same time, it's kind of great, because then you know, okay, we gotta go to the other one, right?
Well, you have to have a financial wall. I mean, it's-
Huh? No, this is a site capacity wall.
I don't think it was agnostic. I mean, I think that it still is a cost benefit. I think what I heard the administrator say is, yes, it would be on balance better to have the fifth graders in the middle school. And it's just a question of balancing.
Well,
but that's-
I also heard K through 8 would be better too, which we're not even talking.
No, but that's what the administrator said.
We hit
That's
the
what
wall in the
she
beginning
said.
from that one.
I'm sorry, just to go back to the original question, the facilities thing, and I don't know the numbers off the top of my head. If Wayne Thomas were, say, 5th and 6th, and Northwood were 7th and 8th, is that?
You still run into the problem
Well,
with
that's
the
dual at
capacity.
2 middle schools, and we've been told by the cabinet that we can't do dual at 2 middle school sites.
So.
Because that would be another way to do it, but.
If this is coming from the Board of Education, a request to test this with the 2 middle schools.
I think it's from a board of education, and there's community members that actually have
Well,
shown
how
some
many
interest.
people here took the tour of Northwood, and do you remember the challenges regarding the buses even now and the pickup right now?
Yes.
The
And
site
the
is so
recess
challenged
sites.
right now.
Sure.
I'm trying to, if that's of any help to you, if we can recall our on-site visit and the comments of the principal who toured us. And these are life safety issues.
Yeah, how about that they have a recess outdoors in a parking lot?
I'm telling you,
That's
and
a problem.
then just imagine the people, forget closing Wayne Thomas, that amount of traffic basically coming down Summit, which is what, a 1 lane in each direction?
No,
I don't think that's any, Edgewood has like 800 people going in, it's a dead end road.
This
You're
is
saying
1,000,
1,000 going,
1,000.
Summit's a through street, it goes from Half Day all the way north, it's much, you know, if you can accommodate that at Edgewood, I would disagree with you, but really the issue, I think what I'm hearing is we're agreeing that combining Wayne Thomas and Northwood doesn't make sense as they exist right now. It's not a good use of space. The question is, if you were going to build something new on the Northwood site, would you do 6-8 or would you do 5-8?
I'm trying to say the 5-8 would have to be in the area of 1,000 students,
Okay.
right? And that, yes, you do 2 blocks on Edgewood, and I believe 800 is really, I think that'll be a problem, but everybody thinks it'll be okay to have 800 in Edgewood. You're going the last 2 blocks, you're coming down a major street as you move the 1,000 children, 800 children. You're coming down Green Bay. You have major arteries headed towards Edgewood. Wayne Thomas sits in the middle, not off of Green Bay Road. It's a different traffic pattern, and I believe you will find a traffic study very challenged to move 1,000 students there.
Well, I think we heard from John is you could do a ring road around that property if you were going to demolish and
Actually, I
start.
couldn't hear it. I was
Okay,
trying to
that's
hear
what I
it.
think he was trying to say. You could ring that property. There are ways you could address that, but really it comes down to I think the question comes down if you're going to build new there, is it 6-8 or is it 5-8? And it would have been nice to hear. I mean, for me, just thinking about reducing the possibilities, it would have been nice to hear the administration say tonight, yeah, you know, the fifth grade in the middle school, not that great of a thing, but that's not what we heard. So.
I'd be actually closer to a 900, not 1,000, based on our new projections of attendance, so that's gonna change. That question.
How many kids are there now?
I thought it's 1,800, we're building for 1,800 in the middle schools.
Well, but it'd be like 9
I
and
mean,
9.
if you had 5 through
If you were
8.
gonna do it equal, it'd be like 9 and 9.
But then you're building up both sites, right? Like technically, if you wanted to, right now, you just leave Edgewood alone because it holds 800 students,
Right.
right?
It actually holds a little more.
Okay, so, I mean, if we have a limited amount of funds, which we obviously do, because people don't want to just hand over everything to, you know, build all these new schools, you want to focus your funds, I guess, on the areas where you need the most. So when you're looking at those 2 middle schools, the one that needs the most in order to make it more functional going forward, if we're going down to a 2 middle school concept, has to be the Northwood Wayne Thomas site. So, you know, if you really want to get the most bang for your buck, you got to funnel that money there to make that workable. So that would make Edgewood stay at around its 800 capacity or whatever.
But you already have about 800 students at that site already, right?
No, you got
They don't have-
650.
You have 534.
About 850.
No, 650 at Edgewood.
No,
530.
Wayne Thomas,
You're
North
five
Wayne
and a
Thomas.
quarter.
You're just
No,
shy of
Wayne
700,
Thomas is another
you're
200.
700 range.
Right.
750.
280.
Just a size number, Edgewood's in the 130, 131 range, and we're at 140 between Northwood and Wayne Thomas. So it's like you have almost enough real estate, just not laid out well to be a single structure.
Right.
To make the Wayne Thomas Northwood facility make sense, you'd have to demolish it and build new, totally new, because you'd have to be concerned about what your footprint is, just like we were when we built Oak Terrace. You have to be careful with the footprint you're gonna build up, but you're not gonna wanna build it too large and too imposing, because the neighbors will get pissed off about that. But that's the only way to make that work, because it's a totally inefficient campus as it's set up.
Didn't you do a scheme, Don, where you had the Wayne Thomas Northwood site showing a possible connection, or at least an addition to Northwood? The conclusion, as I recall, was that the play field would be a little smaller than optimum, but possibly doable. And there were some problems to be worked out as to where the buses would stack up. Now, if you, I think the question that you raised was an excellent one. It seems like the limiting question on whether to make it a 5th through 8th or 6th through 8th is the limited site. So the site is there. Now the question is, how many people can you put on that site? So maybe that's worth 2 studies, one 5 through 8 and one 6 through 8. And I have a feeling, as you probably said, that 6 through 8, there's a possibility it'll work, possibly keeping the buildings. And do another one 6 through 8, knocking it down, and compare the costs. I think we'll
Or you
find
mean 5 through 8, the other one?
5 through 8, and the other one 6 through 8. One combining it, and one new, and compare the costs, and we'll see.
Well, Jeff, in effect, we've come close to doing that when we looked at an 8-building configuration with a new middle school. So, and I'm going to reveal now my list for later. But what we found is that it didn't make a lot of difference if you had 8 schools, which schools they were. What made a big difference in terms of cost was whether you had an all-new school or you had additions. So it was roughly $70 million in additions to accommodate 8 schools, $70 million in upgrades for ADA and life safety and air conditioning and things like that. And if you add a new middle school, you're going to add about $40 or $45 million to that total. So whether it's, as Jeff was suggesting, a 6 through 8 middle school with additions, or a 5 through 8 middle school that's all new, I think that we can say for big picture stuff without looking at configurations today, it's about a $40 million additional cost.
Wait, but don't you save money on additions when you bring 5th grade up to the middle school? So you're making...
You still, but what you have, and this is what I'm saying, real big picture, you're still accommodating the same number of students. So the square footage that you need is not that much different. What's happening when you take the 5th grade students from the grammar schools and you put them in a middle school, you're correct that you don't have to add on as much perhaps to the elementary schools. But remember, we have a surplus of classrooms at the elementary school level, depending upon which schools we close. So what we were looking at was relatively modest additions to the various elementary schools to get the right number of sections. For example, we had a Ravinia and a Brayside Perry with very small additions. And I'll address Ravinia in a minute. But they were small additions, but they were only 2-section schools. The big cost of Ravinia was the ADA compliance and other things to make it a usable school because of its multiple levels.
But you said there was $70 million in additions and $70 million in all the improvements at the elementary school level.
Yeah, no. 70 including the middle schools.
including the middle school.
So it was
If
all
you-
8 buildings.
If you build a new middle school, doesn't that $70 million of additions go down?
You gotta
So-
make a bigger middle school then.
You're right, the 70 million in addition may go down, but it's not 40 million to build a new middle school. It's more than 40
But
million.
it's not 40 million on top of the
It's a net increase of
140.
less.
So here's.
No, it is
No,
40.
no, it is 40.
on
It is
top of the
40.
140.
He's saying the cost of the school is more than 40. You'll reduce some other piece. I'll make up numbers. Say it's 70 for this. The other 70 goes down to 40, so it evens out. It's gonna be $40 million more.
So here's, and I understand that we're all coming at this from different vantage points, and I think it's important. I mean, I get why we're doing this way. Having toured all of the schools, and I hope most of us have had a chance to do that by now, I understand the efficiency of working more with what we have. However, from an educational perspective, I feel like if you look at our different schools, and particularly at the middle school level, you see that there are very different experiences and very different opportunities on those sites. So it's not just, you know, bringing up the indoor air quality and the number of classrooms. It's really trying to figure out how you create equitable experiences at your middle school sites. And I don't know, I mean, we haven't gotten that far, but I think we've got some flexibility at the elementary school level because we have more workable sites. I understand how the middle school campus came about much more having seen our buildings, because you have to solve for middle school. Once you solve for middle school, and I understand, Don, I really appreciated when you did that sort of choose your own adventure in reverse thing, you know, where you solve for middle school and that drives elementary. And I think that's the way we're gonna have to do this.
And that's why we're asking the question about whether or not there is a site that's feasible for 5 through 8, because we're trying to solve for that.
It should also be noted,
Great lift, Don.
from a-
You know, I've heard a lot of discussion. I mean, it started out with a question directed over here, and I've heard a lot of discussion. I want to try to address a few of the issues that have come up. But going specifically back to the question of the Northwood Wayne Thomas site and what will fit on the Northwood Wayne Thomas site. The building area on the Northwood Wayne Thomas site is about 140,000 square feet. When we did a middle school program the last time around, thinking about 2 new middle schools that were evenly divided in the community, the program for that was about 158,000 square feet. So it's a shortfall. If we were going to think about making Edgewood and Northwood Wayne Thomas the same size, for example, we have a shortfall of 20,000 square foot.
But that 158,000 was 6 through 8, right?
No, that's 5 through 8. I'm
Okay.
talking 5
5
through 8 now. This is based on 5 through 8.
Is there
So
actual space?
I'd like to just finish going through the whole thing,
Yeah.
and then I'll answer any questions you have, but just so I don't lose my train of thought here. So I think it's feasible to fit a new 5-8 middle school in the existing Northwood and Wayne Thomas sites, but it is gonna be really tight. We do schools in urban areas all the time, and you are figuring out, how to take advantage of every foot you have on a lot. It would be an approach similar to that. But I think it's possible to make it work. One of the things we would certainly have to do is that there's a detention area south of the Northwood site right now that we would have to fill in and use for parking, so that we can get parking off of the site, and we can devote the site area to play fields and building it. Now, I think just because we can get it to fit, doesn't mean that it's gonna be a good school. Because you take a 140,000 square foot school building and spread it out on a single story, there's gonna be some inefficiencies in that. But I think that one of the fairly easy comparisons we could do would be to look at what that would look like on the Northwood Wayne Thomas site compared to what the Edgewood site would look like. Because I think when you see the comparisons, if you see a site plan at the same scale, and you see how it fits on the Northwood Wayne Thomas site, and you see how it fits on the Edgewood site, you begin to understand how tight it is and how difficult it is. Let me go to the next step, which is if we build a new building on the Northwood Wayne Thomas site, the difference in the footprint size for a new building between 5'8" and 6'8" is going to be nominal. there's not gonna be much difference. There's a certain amount of building area we have to have on the first floor anyway for things like administration, gymnasium, kitchen, cafeteria, things like that. So it might be the difference between how much we build out the second and third stories of the building in order to add fifth grade to it. So that's not gonna make much of a difference. I think it would be a much easier fit if we could build a new building on the site. We could also get a much better functioning school with the new building on the site. But it sounds like there are some questions, and then the other issue about whether we spend all the money on Northwood Wayne Thomas or split it between Northwood Wayne Thomas and Edgewood, I think Mike is right, it really doesn't matter. I think you're gonna spend the money, and whether you spend it in additions on the Edgewood site or you spend it in new construction on the Northwood Wayne Thomas site, it's gonna amount to a similar amount of money. So I don't think that that's a determining factor in this, but it would be fairly easy to draft up some site plan concepts that illustrate these things. And I think seeing them side by side would help to really, help with the understanding of the flexibility. The other thing we always try to keep in mind is that we don't want to design just for today. We want to make sure that there's still some capacity built into the site, that if a need comes up in the future, that there's a way to expand the building in the future. On tight urban sites, we sometimes build in additional structures so we can add a floor to the building, because we can only go up, we have no way to go out. But I think, it's good to allow some capacity, excess capacity, in the site or in the building plan to allow for that possibility in the future as well.
Is that a 3-story building at Northwood, or a 2-story that would be?
3.
3.
Assume 3.
And does 5 through 8 drive it to 3, or would 6 through 8, new construction, take it to 3?
We can look at it a couple of different ways.
And if you were to increase the capacity of Edgewood, and I know you can in classrooms very easily, but now it starts to hold, let's say in Equine, I can't do those 6 sections anymore, so let's just say 900 to 900, roughly, with extra capacity.
Right.
Then what about the gyms and the lunchroom and the auditorium and whatever, the common area spaces in Edgewood become, I thought the principal felt a lot more challenged now at 650, at 800, they're only further challenged, I don't know.
I think you could look at it the same way as Northwood. Can it fit? It can fit.
Because you expand those spaces and replace them, you replace them within the interior.
Well, no, I'm just saying, even Northwood, you can fit everything we talked about on the site, but is it the right fit? Edgewood can hold 900 kids, but is the cafeteria the right fit? We can make it work, but those become the value statements. Do we need to expand, then how far?
But at
But it
800,
works.
people feel it works a lot better, the common spaces work better at 800, don't they?
Not just the actual scheduling and the teaching of classrooms become more effective.
So I'm wrong to think if Edgewood goes from 7 to 8 to 9, that it affects the experience of students there as regards the common amenities in the building?
Well, those will have to be addressed as well. I think that the lunchroom at Edgewood is probably too small as it is
Well, that we
right now.
know, right.
So I think if we're going to add students at Edgewood, we're going to want to at least expand the lunchroom. We're going to want to take a look at some of the other things as well, the gymnasiums. There's a gymnasium addition on there where you have to walk through one gym to get to another, which is kind of a limiting factor in how you use it. So I think there's a
But when you were
point
saying
that-
it's interchangeable, I guess I was trying to think, as someone said on this side of the table, if we went, that the test would be, and I'm talking about the 5th grade test, more like 1,000 and 800, it was the idea of some, that Edgewood would, that they would not be equal dollars, that that would be a less expensive build than trying to make Edgewood a 900 school. But
There's a point in the process, we're not there yet, but there's a point in the process where we're going to look at these things in more detail, and there are going to be options within each one of these configurations. So we get to the point of saying we want an Edgewood school for 800 students or 900 students, whatever it is. We're going to look at the limitations right now, and there are going to be value judgments that are made on, is it worth tearing down a gymnasium to put up a new, more efficient gymnasium? Is it worth adding on a new auditorium that seats 900 students instead of having the existing auditorium that seats 400 students? So there's a whole series of options that are going to come into play on any of these options when we get to that point. And I think it's probably premature to do that lengthy of an investigation at this stage right now.
When you were suggesting the additional studies for the Northwood Wayne Thomas, was one of the studies to combine existing Northwood and existing Wayne Thomas
Yes.
into a middle school of about 500 or so? Okay.
Yes, we would look at it both ways, I would say. One for accommodating 6-8 and one for accommodating 5-8.
Right, and the 6-8 would fit more comfortably.
Yes.
I just wanted to add one, if you take like a broader view of this whole picture, as we sit here and kind of move chess pieces around the board and think about how to make this whole thing work, maybe we should all try to be mindful of the fact that if, let's say for instance, we're talking about a $40 million additional cost for building a whole new structure at the Northwood Wayne Thomas site, we would actually have to, at some point downstream, go to residents, citizens, voters, whatever, next to Edgewood and say, hey, we would like you to approve this referendum that would, mean a $40 million brand new facility in Northwood that you wouldn't be able to take advantage of necessarily. So just, please, be mindful that even though we're thinking about it very holistically, thinking about the entire community, that, people look at this maybe from their personal perspective rather than from the entire community's
But
perspective.
Paul, I would say that before you do that, you show them
Absolutely.
how the two facilities function now.
I completely get it. And
You wouldn't be doing nothing for Edgewood, right? There was other stuff you were gonna do there.
Right, certainly, but I'm saying that we're looking at the whole picture and thinking about it in a very big,
And
we're
again,
looking at
it's
the
not
whole picture.
necessarily
Yeah.
making equal
No, no.
changes around the town, it's making equitable changes.
And I'm not suggesting that the problem's insurmountable, I'm only suggesting that for somebody on the south side of town, it's a harder pill to swallow to make that leap to say that this is good for the entire community, not necessarily, maybe better for somebody on the north side of the community than on the south side of the community as we're looking at this. So just please be mindful of that as we're kind of going through this process.
Okay, no, my whole purpose was just to get more
Yeah,
concrete. Like, what I'm hearing from this is that if you wanted to attempt a 5 through 8 on Northwood Wayne Thomas, you're really looking at building a new building. Because to do the existing ones just doesn't seem like the best use of space, and it's gonna be limiting on some of the other
Although Don's
features.
gonna look at that.
He said it would still be
That's what it sounds like
He
right
said
now.
it would still be tight.
But if you are looking at doing a 6 through 8 building, you may potentially be able to use those existing structures. Are you okay? Whether that's the best structure you're gonna get out of there, that's a value judgment on the voter base and the referendum value if they're willing to pay for it. But I just wanted to get some concrete idea of what we were dealing with when we tried to bring in 5th grade into that site. Because that site seems to be the limiting factor in terms of that conversation. Does that sound fair as a conclusion to that conversation?
Yes and no. Because it also depends on what size you're trying to make them. It's the sizes along with the grade.
I think the second, and this is just my opinion, the second you take Wayne Thomas and you convert it from being an elementary school to now making it part of the middle school, now it has to be the bigger middle school, because those students are gonna go to Indian Trail. And then if you take away both their elementary school and now their middle schools, and you say Indian Trail, now you're gonna go down to Edgewood, that's too much of an ask for that population. So if you're gonna take away their elementary school, you have to give them the bigger middle school and let them feed back into it. You can't take both of those things away from that population. And at least that's my feel, if I was gonna live in that area.
But more students won't fit on that site.
Well, they can build it to
He said the footprint would be about the same size.
Right, I think you would have to build it to at least a 700 capacity in order for Indian Trail to then be able, Indian Trail, which would then absorb the Wayne Thomas kids because you've converted their school away. It'd have to be at least at a 700 capacity to take them back and all the dual language that feeds up there. So I think when you're looking at your models and considering whether it's gonna be a 6 through 8 or a 5 through 8, you have to look at it being the bigger of the middle schools, because we have to give the Wayne Thomas people something back in return for giving up that elementary school.
So even if we didn't expand to the Illinois County fifth graders, if we were to say, the structures, could we say build an auditorium and have that connect to the Wayne Thomas? Because that, one thing that's tells us that that school at Northwood at this point does not have an auditorium, and there's been some concern of that.
Those are old buildings that are gonna be, once you start throwing money
Yeah.
at old buildings.
I think it's bad use of money, I agree.
Agree. No, I think we all agree building new would be much, much better and more, but it's something, it's up to the community and what the community is willing to do.
Well, it's something else to educate them on what the effects are. Once you start taking apart old buildings and trying to, you're pouring a lot of money into really old buildings.
Yeah, no, I get you, I really do, and that's
Well,
what we have to.
I think that one of the things we need to recognize is that you're not gonna be able to pass a referendum frequently, okay? We already took a shot at that, it didn't pass, and resoundingly didn't pass. So I think that, number one, we have to do a good job of whatever ends up, of being able to show the community why it doesn't make sense to sink money into old buildings, why it makes sense to be forward-thinking and visionary in our thinking in terms of doing some new buildings, because we're not gonna have that opportunity again, and I think it would be really penny-wise and pound-foolish to sink money into a lot of these buildings.
And this is a great pivoting point to take you over to Melissa.
Thank you.
And
Thank
she
you.
will show you some of the tours that the education
Yeah.
committee
Do
is
you want to
going
start
to
with high school or Lake Bluff?
whatever you would like.
Okay. I have the Lake Bluff home, so that's what we'll do. Several of us were able to make a tour of the Lake Bluff Middle School on Friday morning, and it was pretty exciting because they did take a building that existed and they renovated it, and they had previously passed a referendum for a new elementary school. So it was also interesting to kind of hear how they did that. So they had the referendum for the new elementary school that passed by 10 votes, she said. Very heated, very controversial, as we've seen happen in this community as well. And with the elementary school, then they were able to do some financial rearranging that they could do.
I'll jump in.
Okay,
So
thanks.
they
Why are you pointing at
when
me?
they went out, so I did a little research. They went out for a $24 million referendum in 2007. At the time, their fund balance, I believe, either at the time or shortly thereafter, was around 125%. Now, the requirement in this district is 25%. That's 5 times what our requirement is. And people in the district said, we don't want to contribute to this project because you have such a large fund balance. Well, that's part of the reason why, at least we were led to believe, that it only passed by 10 votes. So they got to the elementary school. They went from over a period of many years. They went from 4 buildings down to 2. Then, I guess 2 or 3 years ago, they decided they wanted to do the middle school. And what they did in anticipation of that is again, fund balance was very high. They took some of the money, they abated the bonds that they'd issued for the elementary school, and then they didn't need a referendum to pay the $10.5 million. They took their fund balance down from 125 at a peak down to 35%, and that's how they got it. But at the same time that they were doing that, even if they didn't need the public, they brought the public in. They had a whole series of engagements, and they tried to address some of the mistakes they'd made in past referendums.
Thank you.
What is the population of Lake Bluff? Just
800 students. Yeah, it's a much smaller
Much smaller.
population.
Okay, thank you.
So what we're looking at is what they did for one building that we obviously have more things to think about. But it's still interesting to see some of the choices that they made. So they addressed the front entrance so that they would have it ADA accessible and secure. And I'm going to go through these pretty quickly. I'll send them out so you guys can kind of read the bullets later on. One of the really coolest things that they did was they took out the floor, their second level, and dropped it down so that they have this space that they can use for parent conferences. Students can eat there, people can visit, they can do breakout groups, and it's the core of the building. It's when you walk in, you see it drop down, and that's their new cafeteria down now is on that lower level, but kids can also sit on the steps. The steps also have outlets, kids can use their devices there. And then at the top of the steps, that's their STEM lab. That formerly was the cafeteria. So by cutting this hole in the floor and dropping it down, they were able to make their cafeteria on the lower level and use the former cafeteria for their STEM space. And so it's all real open. It's a very interesting space. And then in the bottom shot, you can see on the other side of the open area is their new IMC, which used to be 2 stories. It used to have a balcony with the resource classes upstairs, and they didn't like that you would sort of see or notice the kids going up to the resource classes. So they wanted that to be more embedded in their classroom space, so they brought the special resource classes down to fit in more with their classroom space, and instead made this wide open IMC. The shelves are low, all the books are low where the kids can get to them, and they said they've seen an increase in activity in the library since doing that.
No.
Another cool thing they did was they kept a frontispiece from the school that was taken down. You know, because there was such attachment to the building that was taken down, they kind of spent a little extra money to preserve that archway, and they're building it out in this new IMC. You can see on the left there, the orange, those are booths. So they have all these spaces where they can congregate and study and do breakout rooms. And then the lower slide, again, is their STEM space, and they actually run the same programming that we have. You can see by the signs on their space. And at the back, they have low-level lockers there. And again, that's all part of the same open space, like when you walk in. Here's where you can see the old building ends, and you can see it through the window too, and this is the beginning of the new wing. So that's kind of how they built out, connected from the old space to the new space. So that brick wall is where the previous building ended.
One way they actually accommodated the fact that because they built out, they were losing a window for the classroom, was they just kept the window, but now it's going to the hallway.
More like Indian Trail.
Right,
Yeah.
so it, you know, like if we're thinking, you know, that's a constraint, this is a nice way to work around that constraint.
And they did all new floors, all new ceilings, all new lighting, those kind of things too. The upper right is a science lab, and they figured out that instead of doing each lab, instead of equipping each lab to teach biology, chemistry, and physics, they instead have 3 labs, one for each of those things. So they have a biology lab, a chemistry lab, and a physics lab. And then the bottom photo is a soundproof breakout room. So in terms of studying languages and needing to talk out loud and record yourself, or just even to have a quieter conversation, those are soundproof breakout rooms in the hallway. This is the choir room. Previously it had been on the lower level in a room with no windows, very small space. So they brought it up, they expanded it, and it's a big, bright, you know, wonderful music space. Sorry?
How many stories?
It's a
One
one
story.
story with a garden level.
Right.
So it's one story with a garden level.
So when you say garden level, is like
It has windows.
half below grade?
Halfway.
Or
Pretty much.
more.
So what they,
More.
before
They had classrooms down
they
there.
had classrooms in their,
down there.
what they called the basement before, and that would flood. So what
And they
their
had-
goal
Well,
in this
there were
is-
also limitations on what you can do in classrooms that are below grade,
Right.
actually.
Right.
But since it would flood and had issues, their goal in doing this was to get all the classrooms out of that level. And
Maybe
so-
they never put the swimming pool down there.
Yeah, well then, you know what they did? They put their district offices down there.
But
But
they
actually, they
also-
look great.
They're really nice.
They're really nice.
And they also did a project outside
Drainage
to
tile.
alleviate the flooding
Yeah.
in the basement.
Yeah.
So,
Melissa, I just wanna chime in
Yeah,
on the
please do.
picture on the lower right-hand side, you can see a new hallway that's looking into a classroom space. You can see that they're using old furniture. They didn't go for all new, they made some choices. So the hallway furniture, you see the wobble seats that they have outside of the classroom, but in the classroom, and I think that longer range, they're looking to upgrade the furniture, but they're making do with
Right.
what they had.
You're the same thing at the high school.
Yep.
Correct.
Uh-huh. So this is the district office. So you can see it does not look like a basement.
So that's why it's a garden level
It's a garden level, yes, they made that very clear, it's a garden level. But it has a lot of light, they have a station for, parents and different people to do registrations and different kinds of things there, and there are a lot of meeting spaces. The meeting spaces are flexible, you can pull out walls, close out walls, section it differently. The walls are all made of whiteboards. And then upper right is, again, looking into a classroom from the hallway, and there are just benches, there's just a lot of light, a lot of spaces where you can sit and do other things, maybe outside the classroom and then go back in. In this case, there is not an auditorium, there is a large stage in the gym. So that's Lake Fluff. Does anybody who was there want to add anything else?
Just they totally, like, when you enter and you go into the office has like where the principal is, it has the conference room, but then they did a nice new nurses station. So it's right there, and then they did a nice bathroom inside the nurses area, so that when kids are sick, they're not running down the hall to, have their business done. So it looked great, and it was well designed.
Yeah, the nurse's office was really nice.
Melissa, after we've seen the pictures, you go through a couple more points. What was the total spend and how much was new construction and, not dollars, but square footage of construction?
So the total spend on the middle school renovation was $10.5 million.
That's all we saw was in middle school.
Correct. That's all you saw was the middle school. Yeah, we did
That's all
not
we
visit the
toured.
new elementary school. We were just specifically visiting the middle school. It's a 6th through 8 middle school. And as we said, it's a much smaller population than ours.
It's about 350, something like that.
It's in the 300s.
Yeah.
So
yeah,
how
it was
much was-
330, I think is what I wrote down.
How many square feet generally was new construction, or do you? Was it a lot?
They had an entire new wing, and then
I would
that
guess it
core
was
was a
only
really big
30%.
project.
Yeah, I would
say the
go.
new footprint was only 30%, the majority was a renovation.
So they were being very creative with their
Yes.
Very
Extremely.
creative, and that was one of the reasons we wanted to go visit, because we had heard that it was.
How much
the most
outdoor
creative
space?
thing was
How
when
much
you walked
outdoor
in.
space did they have after
Tons.
they built
They have
it?
no shortage of outdoor space.
Yeah.
They're across the street from a park district facility.
okay,
They have
so
a
they
stellar
have
relationship with their park
huge
district.
Property.
There used to be an elementary school that got raised on that.
Right, and that's
So
where
they
they had
have
the furnace
Okay.
piece.
And they have a gaga pit.
And they have like another outdoor structure that is where they store all their stuff.
They created new storage
But
as
they
part.
had land, they weren't landlocked.
No, so we are definitely
Huge field.
different.
But
Or
they
acre
didn't,
field.
I mean, even though they had land, they didn't take up that much
No,
more.
I understand.
I also want to say one thing that Dr. Sophie was so generous with her insight and with her time. And one of the things that I took away from this, beyond the very innovative use of this space, is she told us how much work they had to do in the community to get buy-in. And this was not for a referendum. This was just getting the purse strings loosened. There was so much healing that had to happen. There was so much communication that had to happen. She had standing coffee hours. She gave out her cell phone, which not asking you to do, Dr. Braggy, but just saying. She said that if they had not done the work in terms of really, not just outreach, but improving dynamics and nurturing relationships that were really broken within this community because of the recent history with this referendum, they would have been dead in the water. And that was a huge takeaway, I think.
Yeah.
But they weren't asking for a referendum.
They weren't asking for a referendum, but they were asking
For change.
for
They were
change,
asking
and
for
they had to
change,
get
and
the
they needed
board,
community buy-in.
and they needed community
What
buy-in.
change were they asking for?
They were asking for $10.5 million.
Well, no, they paid it
That's
themselves.
already in there.
But the change was in the school, to get everybody backing the fact that there was gonna be, they did the construction at the same time students were in the building.
So they broke ground in February on the new wing, and then the second that school was done, she said like literally that night, they broke through the wall where they needed to. They did the project at a very accelerated pace, and it was finished for the kids to start school in August.
My
So
point
they-
is, if they're not, if they weren't building a new building, they weren't shutting any buildings, they were just doing construction on the current building, and they didn't have to pass a referendum to do it, and you said it required a tremendous amount of outreach to the community. Imagine our change.
Right.
No, that's why I'm bringing this up, Art.
So absolutely, Melissa, the addition was only classrooms. And they wanted to replace every classroom. Remember, she felt they built more classrooms than they needed.
Well,
but
they wanted
that
to replace all
school
the ones
was-
that they were no longer using on the lower levels.
That's right,
They
so
built the
they
same amount
almost went
upstairs.
classroom for classroom,
Mhm.
even though they also are not experiencing an increase in enrollment, but they felt that their community felt strongly about classroom size,
Mhm.
which is something we're thinking of departing from. I just think that's important for you know, to
And
remember.
and she said they have experienced both growth in the elementary school since the new facility has been built and growth in the middle school.
And the other thing is they did not build an auditorium. They used their gym, which is full size, fabulous, and they have a very highly respected, popular part. They think, you know, they'll go nose to nose with anyone in their musical programming and theater by having a very adequate sized gym with a great stage. So for me, a person who's been asking a lot about the theaters, she said, you know, they're gonna expand from 2 to 3 nights. They bring in chairs. They don't have any kind of permanent seating that's even designed for the theater for their events. They're all school. They do not use the gym. They use those stairs
Correct.
because it's only a 300 and some. So there's a lot to be shared. They were very innovative, and that was a 50s building. That's the other thing.
Right, right.
Northwood is a 50s building, but it was a two.
And there are a lot more
two-level building.
photos. Both
Ours
Megan and
is
Julie
not.
took photos. I didn't include them all because I knew we were trying to go at a good clip. So should we move on to the high school?
I don't
Can we
even
go
think
to
you saw
the
it.
school in about 10 minutes? 'Cause I've
I don't
got
even
about
think you
Yep,
saw
tons
the
of
yep.
stuff to talk about.
So for those who were not able to make the high school tour, it is also a really cool, innovative building, what they've done with it. And I'll just read through the first 3 points. What the principal said was every student needs to be touched by the referendum. And I think that gets to what you were saying, that when we think about what we're going to do with the schools in this community, that we think about how it affects every student. Can we give everybody something? Learning drives use of space, not the other way around, was something else that he said. And then the last one, the 4 C's instead of the 3 R's: communication, collaboration, critical thinking, and cross-cultural competency. So the building is a mix of rebuild, reconfigure, and new construction. It was funded by a combination of referendum and operating budget, and Dan could go into more detail with that if you want to hear more. Things that they did: upgraded to ADA compliancy. They made it so that the indoor air quality was up to acceptable standards, sprinklers installed, new ceilings, LED lights. They saved a lot in their electricity bill between the windows, the upgrade of the windows, and the LED lights. The room that you see at the bottom is a double-sized room, again with a pull-out wall that has a whiteboard on it. At the top is the art lab. Sort of some interesting things. The outlets come from the ceiling, so you don't have to worry about the placement on the floor or the placement by the wall, because you can actually move them around and plug into where they hang down from the ceiling. The bottom room is the innovation room. It's cool. It's got rounded walls rather than square, and it's all whiteboard, so you could write equations all around the room if you wanted to. The furniture is also flexible. And again, there are more photos in the folder that Julie and Megan took, where the furniture actually folds up and can do different things. Same with the teacher's desk. They can be lifted and lowered. Wireless projectors, spaces that open up like galleries. You know, we saw some doors that swing this way and do different things. They do have a chef's kitchen, which previously they had to pay for off-site vocational education. So, you know, that's something that they brought on-site, and they do also offer adult ed. Additionally, they have a preschool lab, which was kind of surprising. I don't know how many of us knew that there was a preschool lab at the high school. And again, the activities are designed by the high school students, and it's tuition funded. They have space for extended life skills, again, previously outplaced, and now it's on-site, which is a better solution financially and philosophically. And then things that they were not able to do, they took out the library and cafeteria improvements. They did not replace the furniture throughout, as we mentioned, but they're going to continue making those enhancements as money becomes available. Just another comment on the high school, we noticed a lot of ramps. So instead of having, you know, somebody would have to go to a certain end of the building to always take the elevator or to get around that way, we noticed there were a lot of ramps. So it was for all the students, not stairs halfway and a ramp on the other side. It was sloped throughout, which, you know, is accessible for everyone.
And safer.
Yeah.
And safer.
The reason was the C building wasn't as level, so they had to, you know, they had to do that.
Right, right. So like in this gallery space at the top, you know, they have, again, the whiteboard dividers, the doors that turn like that, so people can come in and out. Just some interesting things, and so that's the quick sum up of that. Anybody who was there want to add anything? And there are more photos in the folders too.
Could you talk about the lunch, the food and kitchens at Lake Bluff?
So at Lake Bluff, they do not have a kitchen. Their food service is provided by Kiddos
Lunch program.
Thank you. And they have about, was it 12%?
12% free and reduced lunch, and they're not in the national program, they pay for it themselves.
And they don't do breakfast, right? It's just lunch?
Just lunch.
Do we have any idea what their cost per student is compared to ours?
5 versus 275.
So they pay 5, we pay 275.
I've been dogging this.
Yeah. So anybody who has not been able to go to the high school, I hope that you can. It's really a neat space to walk through and see what they did. You know, places in between brick sections. They now have like airy walkways and different, you know, that are covered. That are, you know, they've combined the spaces and they've filled in, you know, spaces in between. And they did a lot with their fine arts that we don't have pictures of. They have a black box theater, and in between the black box theater and the other theater space, they have a set building room with like movable garage doors so the sets can go in and out into the theater spaces. They have a ceramics room with an outdoor classroom. A lot of cool stuff.
So I'd like you to all pay attention to her enthusiasm on both these buildings. The newest portion of Highland Park High School, before it was added on to, not counting the science wing, is 50 years old. Other portions of it are 100 years old. Lake Bluff is over 60 years old.
Right.
So we have old building stock, but it doesn't mean you can't create a really exciting environment with old buildings. You just have to design it wisely. And the nice thing about the high school is they use Gilbane as their construction manager. We've got Gilbane as our construction manager. So we have the benefit of having someone who's got community experience in roughly real time to help us figure out the most cost-efficient way of addressing whatever we decide to do.
From both of the tours, that was actually a huge takeaway, was that both administrators felt so strongly that it was a tremendous benefit to have an on-site construction manager.
Yep, we saw that in both, that Gilbane is still at the high school and IHC is still at Lake Bluff, working out the kinks.
There's a lot of value there.
Yep.
Can I just clarify one thing? I think you may have answered it and I missed it. I wasn't at the Lake Bluff school. The photos that you showed us were what they did in the existing building?
Yeah.
Yes, except
And that was attached to a 50-year-old building?
That is the 50-year-old.
That is the
Oh, it is
50-year-old. It's a 1950s.
60.
They redid the entire front entrance, and then they also did that core section that was like a 2 to 3 floor height, but it dropped down. It was,
And both
they called it the
the
core.
new wing and the existing wing formed the middle school
Correct.
for about 300 kids.
Oh.
Right.
330.
330.
330.
And it's the only middle school. It's the only middle school.
Everything there cost $11 million, roughly.
Yes.
But they already had HVAC.
Yeah, so they did a
already
renovation in
had-
2005.
They already had a what?
Yeah, let me clarify. They did a renovation in
Air
2005.
Like HVAC.
Air conditioning.
They did a renovation in 2005 where they had air conditioning, they had a new gym that was built in 2005. The gym and stage combination was built in 2005. They built a new band room in 2005. Like, there's a whole corridor that was new as part of that renovation. So there are some things there that, you know, we're behind on that. So you couldn't really line it up
In
parallel.
other words, it would be wrong to say that if you built a new school for 600 kids, it would be 20 million?
Oh,
No, you couldn't say that.
You can't extrapolate from what they did.
But I think
They
there
were
is-
a lot further ahead already, you know, on where
They
they
had
are.
a lot more to work with.
They had a lot more to work with.
In a good way.
And another thing to share, if you could remember how much time the superintendent spent on the process of the entry resonating with the existing building and architecture, and that it was driven by the city of Lake Bluffs. I'm going to assume she didn't know architectural review or site plan review. They came in, she made it sound like it was far from a rubber stamp process, and that they challenged them to celebrate the entrance more. I don't think she used that word, but I think I've heard that word. And she felt it was a good process. Slowed them down, cost them quite a few bucks more, and she was satisfied that that process, because the initial vestibule was also the entry, and now it seems more architecturally significant and compatible with the structure they have.
And useful.
Useful, there's more space.
There's
was
for
always
people.
seating
useful.
space.
That's not what
No,
she's
but
talking about.
not just to get in and out, but there's also seating. Kids
Yeah.
can actually hang out there. It was
Yeah.
we were there during parent-teacher conferences. We saw kids hanging out at the entrance of the school.
So coming back to
We're just talking about the governmental process is my point.
just coming back to the comment that Jeff made, for example, and the process that we've been through in this committee, just looking at the situation that District 113 had by renovating the high school and the cost of that, and what you see in Lake Bluff.
Thank you, Melissa.
It's impressive how much we have to catch up. So
Right.
like HLS, ADA, air conditioning, things that other districts may have been making incremental investments over time or big decisions over time. So much of ours have been deferred. So I feel like a big education point for the community whenever we roll out whatever we're gonna roll out is it's not, if the price tag is $100 million or more, it's not $100 million for a grandiose new building. It's a whole big chunk of that, 70 or 80 million or more, is just to catch up with the things that we absolutely have to do. We have no choice not to do that.
So I have a suggestion, maybe, Megan, maybe you could do another slide like you did for kindergarten, showing the schools around us that have air conditioning and ADA compliance and all the things that we're talking about doing that we need to do.
Because we're closing a gap. I think the point is, part of this is closing a gap and doing things we've got to do, but we haven't figured out the way to do previously. And then it is kind of becoming 21st century ready, which a lot of other districts have kind of
and I think,
ahead of us.
Sure, and I think that a lot of resistance within the community, begins with this assumption that it's been good enough. But I think that when you get that comparative analysis, it really puts it into context where we are relative to our neighbors.
Right, there's a lot of people who grew up in this community who say, when I was here, we didn't have air conditioning. They don't understand that just doesn't.
Well, what it means is
But
your
just
property
to
value is going
address
down
what
because your
Raphael was
neighbors.
saying, I don't think any of the studies that have been prepared, all of them had what you're talking about and were priced out with those things. The thing that we're really talking about is having everything that has those things in it and a good educational aspect to it compared to something which is maybe $40 or $50 million more.
Well, Jeff, to that point though, because you're going to have it the same way they do with the middle school campus. You're going to have people who, you could say, oh, well, we could build a new building for 40 or 50 million and more. You're going to have people who could say, yeah, but you could do it without air conditioning for 15 million less. Or you could do it without the ADA for 10, 6 or 7 million. So it's every step of the way is a challenge.
But in terms of
and a dollar amount.
trying to narrow it down to what we're looking at,
That's been a
What
constant
you're talking
throughout,
about is
yes.
how do you sell it?
That's been a
But
constant
how,
every single
but in,
one.
well, I think what we're trying to do, the committee, is to narrow it down to the couple options that have something that's gonna pass. And with a good sales job, it will pass. But if you make the wrong decision on how much it's going to cost, it may not pass, and you can't rely on a sales job.
And I thought what they did at the high school was extraordinary, but they also gave things up in order to keep the price down.
Right.
That's critical.
No, and we have to do that.
Yeah.
There's value judgments on everything that goes into this.
That's
And
why I'm
that's
trying
why
to
we have
call
to get out
attention
and talk
to
to
the
the
kitchen
community.
and light bulb.
do
In other
focus
words,
groups.
there were tremendous highlights there. There was great creativity. The scale is quite different, but they did forego, like you mentioned, the furnishings, like I want, the full kitchen and stuff like that, so it's just like for every decision, every decision is made on balance, a value proposition.
Well, and one of the purposes of these tours is to see kind of some of the things that other communities have done with what they had to work
And-
with.
and
So,
the success
we want to
stories
kind
even
of share
after
that
that.
as we go along, because there are some, when you think about our buildings, and we've toured our buildings, sometimes it's hard to think outside of that space.
You're right.
So it's fun to see what these other buildings have done.
I agree.
How innovative they can be and how creative they can be. And, we saw a lot of Don's ideas from the middle school campus where he had a lot of cool things. When it got, closer and closer to the vote as it was flushed out more and more, there were a lot of really cool things in that middle school campus. And we can incorporate some of those ideas. We can pull some of these other ideas from these other buildings and really do some neat things.
So we are closing here in on the 10 o'clock hour. The good news is we're meeting more frequently, so I think it'd be fair to everyone to kind of cut it tonight and pick up with the objectives at the next meeting or at the beginning. So with that, we will.
We want to
call tonight's to a close.
thank Don, John, Dr. Brighton for.
Oh, what about
And Nicholas.
And Nicholas.